In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a shocking murder rocks the ancient St. Michael's Church. A drifter, Victor Grange, found dead with stolen jewels glittering beside him. Enter Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster with a mind unraveling a web of greed and betrayal. From a shadowy stranger in a grey suit to a coded note hidden in the crypt, she uncovers a sinister syndicate led by the glamorous Lady Beatrice Harrow. As secrets spill and killers strike, can Miss Marple trap the mastermind before the church's sanctity is lost forever? Dive into a classic Agatha Christie mystery where every whisper hides a clue. Chapter 1. The death in the Navaday village of St. Mary Mead lay bathed in the soft gold of an autumn dawn. Its cottages and hedgerows touched with the crisp promise of October. At the heart of the village, the ancient church of St. Michael stood, sentinel, its Norman tower casting a long shadow across the Dukist graveyard. Within its hallowed walls, however, a scene unfolded that would shatter the morning's tranquility. The Reverend Leonard Clement, vicar of St. Michael's, pushed open the heavy oak door of the church at precisely 7 o'clock, as was his custom. The air inside was cool, carrying the faint scent of wax and old hymnals. His footsteps echoed on the stone flags as he made his way toward the chancel, intending to prepare for the morning service. But as he passed the third pew on the north side, he froze. A man sat there, slumped unnaturally, his head tilted at an odd angle against the carved wooden armrest. His eyes, wide and unseeing, stared toward the east window, where sunlight streamed through the stained glass, casting a mosaic of reds and blues across his pallid face. Mr. Clement's heart thudded. He approached cautiously, his voice trembling. As he called, "Sir, are you unwell?" There was no response. The man's hand, resting on his lap, was cold to the touch. Beside him, on the pew, lay a small velvet pouch, its drawstring loosened. From it spilled a cascade of glittering jewels, sapphires, and a single ruby that caught the light like a drop of blood. The vicar staggered back, his mind reeling. Murder, he thought, though the words seemed alien in this sacred space. He hurried to the vestry, where the telephone's shrill ring soon summoned the village constable. By mid-morning, St. Mary Mead buzzed with the news. The constable, a stolid young man named Hearn, had secured the church, and Dr. Haydock, the local physician, confirmed the man was dead, likely from a blow to the head. Word spread like wildfire, reaching the neat cottage of Miss Jane Marple, who sat by her parlour window, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. Her maid, Lily, burst in, her apron askew, eyes wide with excitement. "Miss Marple, have you heard? A man's been found dead in the church, with jewels scattered all about him. They're saying it's murder." Miss Marple's needles paused. She adjusted her spectacles, her mild blue eyes sharpening. "In St. Michael's? How extraordinary. Who was he, Lily?" "Nobody knows. Miss Stranger, they say Dr. Haydock's with him now, and Constable Hearns sent for the inspector." "From Much Benham." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning. "Jewels, you say? How curious they were left behind." She resumed her knitting, but her thoughts were elsewhere. A church, she reflected, was a place of refuge, yet this man had found no safety there. She recalled a long-ago incident in her youth, when a thief had hidden stolen silver in a chapel, only to be betrayed by his own accomplice. People, she murmured to herself, are much the same, whether in a city or a village. At the vicarage, Mrs. Clement wrung her hands, her usually cheerful face pale. "Leonard, what will this do to the parish? A murder in our church, and those jewels stolen, no doubt. It's a desecration. The vicar patted her hand absently, his thoughts on the dead man's face, which had seemed oddly familiar. We must trust the police, my dear. Inspector Craddock will be here soon. He's a capable fellow. Miss Marple, invited to the vicarage for tea that afternoon, listened quietly as Mrs. Clement recounted the morning's horror. The vicar added that the dead man carried no papers, only a few shillings and a cheap watch. The jewels, however, were another matter exquisite and clearly valuable. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sifting through possibilities. A sanctuary, she said softly, is a place where one seeks protection. But it seems this poor man brought his danger with him. Mrs. Clement shivered. Do you think he was a thief, Miss Marple, hiding in the church? Perhaps, Miss Marple replied, her tone thoughtful. Or perhaps he was running from something or someone. Her eyes drifted to the window, where the church tower loomed against the fading light. She declined a second scone, her appetite replaced by a quiet resolve. Tomorrow she would visit St. Michael's herself. The nave, she suspected, held more secrets than the police might find alone. Chapter 2. The stranger's identity, the morning after the grim discovery in St. Michael's Church. St. Mary Mead was a hive of subdued whispers and furtive glances. The village shop, usually a place of cheerful banter, hummed with speculation about the dead man and his glittering hoard. Miss Jane Marple, stepping out to post a letter, caught fragments of conversation tales of thieves, curses, and divine retribution. She smiled faintly, accustomed to the villagers' flair for drama, but her mind was fixed on the facts, sparse though they were. At the police station in Much Benham, Inspector Dermot Craddock, a lean man with a quick mind and a polite demeanour, took charge of the investigation. He arrived in St. Mary Mead by noon, his black notebook already filled with notes from Constable Hearn's report. The dead man, he learned, had been identified through a laundry mark on his shirt as Victor Grange, a vagrant known to the London police for petty theft. Grange had no known connections to St. Mary Mead, which deepened the mystery. Why had he come to this quiet corner of England, and with such valuable jewels? Craddock visited the church, where the pew still bore the faint outline of Grange's body, though the corpse had been removed to the morgue. The velvet pouch, now in police custody, had contained gems worth thousands stolen, Craddock suspected, from a high-profile heist. He examined the nave, noting the polished brass candlesticks and the worn kneelers, but found no trace of a struggle. A clean job, he muttered, too clean for a drifter like Grange. Miss Marple, meanwhile, accepted an invitation to lunch at the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement's nervous chatter filled the air. It's dreadful, Miss Marple, she said, passing the shepherd's pie. A stranger in our church, and now they say he was a criminal. What if he had accomplices? The vicar, more composed, shook his head. We mustn't jump to conclusions, Maud. Inspector Craddock seems competent. He asked about visitors, too. The church this week, but I could recall nothing unusual. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. Churches attract all sorts, Mr. Clement. Pilgrims, penitents, and sometimes those with less pious motives. She paused, buttering a roll. Did you notice anyone lingering near the church recently? Someone, perhaps, who seemed out of place. Mrs. Clement frowned. Now that you mention it, I did see a man loitering by the lich gate on Tuesday, tall, in a dark coat. I thought he was admiring the roses, but he moved off quickly when I approached. The vicar nodded slowly. Yes, An old Mr. Hargreaves, the churchwarden, mentioned a fellow asking about service times last week. Well-dressed, he said, but with a sharp way of speaking, not local. Miss Marple filed these details away, her mind weaving a pattern. She recalled a case from her nephew Raymond's days in London, where a thief had used a church as a drop point for stolen goods. A church is a public place, she mused aloud, yet its corners offer privacy, an ideal spot for a meeting, if one is discreet. After lunch, Miss Marple walked to the church, her black umbrella shielding her from a light drizzle. Inspector Craddock was there, conferring with Dr. Haydock outside the vestry. She greeted them with her usual courtesy, and Craddock, who respected her insight from a previous case, shared a few particulars. Victor Grange was killed by a single blow to the temple, he said. No weapon found, and the jewels were untouched. It's as if the killer wanted them found. How curious, Miss Marple said, her voice soft. A thief who abandons his prize is either interrupted or making a point. What do you know of Granger's past, Inspector? Craddock glanced at his notebook. A small-time crook, in and out of trouble. No record of handling anything as grand as these jewels. We're checking with London to see if he was tied to a bigger operation. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the lich gate, where Mrs. Clement had seen the stranger. A bigger operation, she echoed. Yes, that would explain much. She declined Craddock's offer to escort her home, preferring to walk alone, her thoughts circling the dead man and his unlikely presence in St. Mary Mead. Grange, she suspected, was a pawn in a larger game, and the church was merely the board on which it was played. As she passed the Blue Boar Inn, she made a mental note to inquire about recent guests. Strangers, in her experience, rarely passed through a village unnoticed. Chapter 3. The Inquests, Close to Village Hall of St. Mary Mead. A modest building with whitewashed walls and a pitched roof had never seen such a crowd. By 10 o'clock on the morning of the inquest, every seat was taken, and latecomers stood at the back, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the proceedings. The death of Victor Grange in St. Michael's Church, coupled with the discovery of stolen jewels, had ignited a fever of curiosity in the village. Farmers, in their Sunday best, sat beside shopkeepers, while the ladies of the Women's Institute whispered behind their gloved hands. Miss Jane Marple, seated near the front in her neat black coat and a hat adorned with a single feather, observed the assembly with her usual quiet attention. Her knitting lay in her lap, untouched for now, as her sharp blue eyes took in every detail. The coroner, Mr. Melchett, a portly man with a walrus moustache and a reputation for brisk efficiency, called the inquest to order. His voice, resonant from years of addressing juries, cut through the murmurs. We are here to determine the cause and circumstances of the death of Victor Grange, found deceased in St. Michael's Church on the morning of October 12th. Us proceed with decorum and respect for the gravity of the matter. The first witness was the Reverend Leonard Clement, who recounted his discovery of the body. His voice trembled slightly as he described finding Grange slumped in the pew, the velvet pouch of jewels spilling onto the stone floor. I thought at first he was asleep, the vicar said, adjusting his spectacles. But when I touched his hand, it was cold. I knew then he was gone. He confirmed the church had been locked the previous night, with no signs of forced entry. Though he admitted the old lock on the vestry door was temperamental, Miss Marple listened intently, noting the vicar's mention of the lock. She recalled a conversation with Mrs. Price, the church's cleaning lady, who had once complained about the vestry door sticking. A faulty lock, she mused, could be exploited by someone familiar with the church's quirks. Her thoughts were interrupted as Mr. Clement stepped down, his face pale but composed. Dr. Haydock, the village physician, took the stand next. His testimony was precise, delivered with the calm authority of a man accustomed to grim duties. Victor Grange died. From a single blow to the right temple, he stated, consulting his notes. The injury was caused by a blunt instrument, likely a heavy object with a smooth surface. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting the attack was sudden or unexpected. I estimate the time of death between 10 o'clock and midnight on October 11th. He added that Grange was otherwise in poor health, with signs of malnutrition, but no other injuries. The coroner leaned forward. Dr. Haydock, can you speculate on the nature of the weapon? Not with certainty, the doctor replied. It could be a candlestick, a stone, or even a metal pipe. The blow was delivered with considerable force, indicating a strong assailant or a moment of intense emotion. Miss Marple's mind flickered to the brass candlesticks in the church, polished to a gleam but heavy enough to serve as a weapon. She made a mental note to ask Inspector Craddock if they had been examined. Her attention returned to the stand. As Constable Hearn was called, the young constable, visibly nervous under the scrutiny of the village, described securing the scene and finding the pouch of jewels. There were emeralds, sapphires, and a ruby, he said, reading from his report. The pouch was open, as if dropped in haste. I found no weapon, nor any signs of a struggle. He confirmed the jewels had been sent to Scotland Yard for identification, and preliminary reports linked them to a theft in London. Mr. Melchett pressed him. No fingerprints on the pouch, Constable. None, sir, Hearn replied. It was clean, which struck me as odd. The pew and surrounding area were dusted, but only smudges were found. Miss Marple's knitting needles, now in her hands, clicked softly. A clean pouch suggested premeditation, not panic. She recalled a case from her youth, where a thief had worn gloves to handle stolen goods, only to be caught by a stray thread left at the scene. The absence of fingerprints here pointed to a careful criminal, one who knew the value of discretion. The next witness was Mr. Hargreaves, the churchwarden, a stooped man with a weathered face and a memory as sharp as his pruning shears. He testified to seeing Grange in the village 2 days before his death, arguing with a man near the Lich Gate. It was late afternoon, Hargreaves said, his voice gravelly. Grange was gesturing wildly, and the other fellow, a tall chap in a fine coat, looked angry. I couldn't hear their words, but it wasn't a friendly chat. The stranger walked off toward the station, and Grange went into the church. The coroner's eyes narrowed. Can you describe this man, Mr. Hargreaves? Tall, as I said, dark hair, clean-shaven, wearing a grey coat and a trilby hat. He had a city look about him, not one of ours. Hargreaves paused, then added, I saw him again the next day, near the Blue Boar Inn, but only from a distance. A murmur rippled through the hall. Miss Marple's needles paused. The description matched Mrs. Clement's account of the man. By the Lich Gate, and it stirred a memory of her own fleeting glimpse of a stranger in the village shop, buying cigarettes with a London accent. She resolved to visit the shop later, certain the postmistress, Miss Weatherby, would have noticed such a visitor. Inspector Craddock, seated near the front, scribbled in his notebook. He had not been called to testify, as his investigation was ongoing, but his presence was a quiet reminder of the police's interest. Miss Marple caught his eye, and he gave her a slight nod, acknowledging her knack for unearthing truths others overlooked. The final witness was Mrs. Price, the cleaning lady, who shuffled to the stand with an air of reluctant duty. Her testimony was brief but revealing. "I cleaned the church the evening before, around 6, she said, twisting her apron. "Everything was in order. No strangers, no mess. The vestry door was locked when I left. But it's an old thing, jams sometimes. I didn't see the pouch or any jewels." Mr. Melchett questioned her closely. "You're certain the church was empty when you left, Mrs. Price?" "As certain as I can be," she replied. "I checked the pews and the chancel. If someone was hiding, they were quieter than a mouse." Miss Marple's lips twitched. A mouse, she thought, or a fox slipping through the shadows. She pictured the church's layout, the nave, the chancel, the vestry tucked behind the organ. A man could hide there, waiting for a rendezvous, especially if he knew the cleaning schedule. She made another mental note to examine the vestry herself. If Craddock would permit it, the coroner adjourned for a brief recess, and the hall filled with the rustle of movement and hushed voices. Miss Marple remained seated, her thoughts racing. The inquest had confirmed Granger's death as murder, but the jewels and the mysterious stranger raised more questions than answers. Why had Grange brought the gems to St. Mary Mead? And why had his killer left them behind? She recalled a remark from her friend Dolly Bantry, who had once said that criminals were like magpies, drawn to shiny things but careless in their greed. Yet this crime felt different, calculated, almost theatrical. As the crowd thinned, Miss Marple rose and made her way to the tea urn, where Dolly Bantry was holding court with a tray of biscuits. "Jane, you look positively absorbed," Dolly said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "What do you make of it all? A thief killed in a church, jewels strewn about like confetti. It's straight out of a novel." Miss Marple accepted a cup of tea, her expression serene but her mind alert. "It is theatrical, isn't it?" she said. "But I suspect the stage was set for a purpose. A thief who leaves his spoils behind is either foolish or desperate, and I don't think Victor Grange was either. He was a pawn, Dolly, in a game he didn't fully understand." Dolly's eyebrows shot up. "A pawn? You mean a gang, like those jewel thieves in London?" "Oh, Jane, how thrilling." "Not thrilling," Miss Marple corrected gently, "but tragic. Grange was killed to keep a secret, I'm sure of it. The question is, whose secret?" She sipped her tea, her gaze drifting to the window, where the church tower loomed against a grey sky. "I think I shall take a walk to the church this afternoon. Fresh air clears the mind." Dolly laughed. "You mean you'll poke about for clues, you sly thing? Well, don't let Craddock catch you rearranging his evidence." Miss Marple smiled, but said nothing. After the recess, the inquest resumed, and Mr. Melchett delivered his verdict: death by unlawful killing, with the investigation referred to the police. The jury, a mix of local tradesmen and farmers, nodded solemnly, and the hall emptied as villagers spilled into the street. Eager to dissect the proceedings, Miss Marple lingered, exchanging pleasantries with Mrs. Clement, who was still fretting about the church's reputation. "It's a stain, Miss Marple," she said. "How will we ever hold services there without thinking of that poor man?" "Time heals such wounds," Miss Marple replied, patting her arm. "And truth, Mrs. Clement has a way of cleansing even the darkest corners." She left the hall and walked slowly toward the church, her umbrella tucked under her arm. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the air fresh and sharp. St. Michael's stood quiet now, its doors closed, but Miss Marple circled the building, her eyes scanning the lich gate. and the path to the vestry. She paused by the yew trees, where Grange and the stranger had argued. The ground was soft from recent rain, and she noticed a faint impressioner heel mark. Perhaps, though too faint to be certain, she filed it away, along with the other fragments, the clean pouch, the faulty lock, the man in the grey coat. At the Blue Boar Inn, she stopped to chat with the landlord, Mr. Jenkins, who confirmed a guest matching Hargreaves' description had stayed briefly, paying in cash and leaving the day after Granger's death. Called himself Mr. Lyle, Jenkins said, polishing a glass. Kept to himself, but he asked about trains to London. Seemed in a hurry. Miss Marple thanked him and continued her walk, her mind weaving the threads together. Grange, a petty thief, had stumbled into a larger scheme, one that required his silence. The jewels were bait, she suspected, or a message, but to whom? And why choose St. Mary Mead, a village so far from the glittering world of Mayfair? By the time she reached her cottage, the afternoon was fading into dusk. She settled by the fire, her cat's tuppence curling at her feet, and picked up her knitting. The inquest had laid bare the bones of the crime, but the flesh, the motive, the mastermind remained hidden. A church is a sanctuary, she murmured, echoing her earlier thought. But secrets have a way of finding their way out. Tomorrow, she would call on Inspector Craddock and share her observations, discreetly as always. For now, she knitted, her needles clicking in time with her thoughts, each stitch a step closer to the truth. Chapter 4. The Village Whispers. The days following the inquest saw St. Mary Mead settle into an uneasy rhythm, its quiet lanes and tidy cottages overshadowed by the shadow of murder. The villagers, ever prone to speculation, wove tales of intrigue. Around Victor Granger's death, each more elaborate than the last. Some spoke of a cursed jewel, others of a vengeful smuggler, and a few whispered of dark dealings in the church itself. Miss Jane Marple, walking to the village shop with her wicker basket, caught snatches of these stories, her mild expression masking the keen interest beneath. Gossip, she knew, was like a river muddied, but often carrying grains of truth. The shop, run by Miss Weatherby, was a hub of such talk. Its shelves, stocked with tinned peas and bars of soap, were less a drawer than the counter, where news was, traded as freely as pennies. Miss Marple entered to the jingle of the bell, nodding to Mrs. Bunce, the baker's wife, who was lamenting the scandal to anyone who would listen. "It's a disgrace," Mrs. Bunce declared, her flour-dusted hands on her hips. "A church ought to be safe, not a place for thieves and killers. My Tom says it's the work of a London gang." Miss Weatherby, peering over her spectacles, nodded sagely. "I heard the dead man was seen with a stranger at the Blue Boar. A city type, all flash and no manners. Mark my words, he's mixed up." In it, Miss Marple, selecting a packet of tea, listened without comment. She recalled Mr. Jenkins' mention of Mr. Lyle, the guest who had left abruptly after Granger's death. "A stranger, you say?" she ventured, her tone light. "Did you see him yourself, Miss Weatherby?" The postmistress brightened, eager to share. "I did, Miss Marple. Tuesday last, he came in for cigarette sprayers, the expensive kind. Tall, dark hair, grey suit, spoke sharp like he was used to giving orders, paid with a crisp note and didn't wait for change." Mrs. Bunce leaned in. "That's the one old Hargreaves saw arguing with Grange, isn't it? Near the Lich Gate, likely," Miss Weatherby said. "And Mrs. Price told me she saw a man like that near the church the evening before the murder. Skulking, she said, by the yew trees. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "How observant everyone is," she murmured, placing her tea in her basket. "It's remarkable what a village notices." She paid and left, her mind sifting through the details. The man in the grey suit, Lyle, if that was his name, was a thread running through the village's stories, tying Grange to the church and, perhaps, to the killer. She resolved to speak with Mrs. Price herself, certain the cleaning lady's sharp eyes had missed little. Her next stop was the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement had invited her for morning coffee. The vicarage parlour, with its chintz, curtains and faded rugs, was a haven of familiarity, but Mrs. Clement's usual cheer was strained. "Jane, I can't sleep for thinking of it," she confessed, pouring coffee from a silver pot. "The church feels tainted, and the talk in the village people saying the jewels were cursed." Miss Marple accepted a cup, her hands steady despite the weight of her thoughts. "People love a story, Maud, but curses are less common than greed or fear. Tell me, have you heard anything new about visitors to the church? Anyone who might have known Grange?" Mrs. Clement hesitated, then nodded. "There was something. My cook, Elsie, mentioned a man asking about the church's history last week. She met him on her way to market near the Lich Gate. He was polite, she said, but curious about the crypt and whether it was ever used. Elsie thought it odd, but she told him it's just for storage now." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. Did Elsie describe him? Tall, dark-haired, in a smart coat. She didn't catch his name, but he had a London way about him. Mrs. Clement sighed. "It's probably nothing, but with all this talk of strangers, it stuck in my mind. It's worth noting," Miss Marple said gently. "Even small details can light the way." She sipped her coffee, picturing the crypto-damp, shadowed space beneath the chancel, rarely visited. If Grange or his associates had used it, they would have needed local knowledge or careful reconnaissance. The man in the grey suit, she suspected, was no casual tourist. Leaving the vicarage, Miss Marple walked toward the church, her steps slow but purposeful. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. St. Michael's loomed ahead, its stone walls weathered but steadfast. She paused by the Lich Gate, where Grange and the stranger had argued, and examined the ground. The rain had erased any clear tracks, but a broken twig caught her eye, snagged on a low branch. It was fresh, suggesting recent passage. She tucked it into her pocket, a habit from years of noticing what others overlooked. Inside the church, the nave was silent, the air heavy with the memory of violence. Miss Marple moved quietly, her eyes scanning the pews and the chancel. Spot where Grange had died was unmarked, but she pictured him there, slumped against the wood, the jewels spilling from his grasp. She approached the vestry, its door slightly ajar, and peered inside. The room was small, cluttered with hymnals and a dusty typewriter, but her attention fixed on the lock. It was old, as Mrs. Price had said, with faint scratches around the keyhole marks that could be from age or something more deliberate. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with Inspector Craddock, who had entered the church unnoticed. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat. "I might have guessed you'd be here, finding anything of interest." She smiled, unruffled. "Only the peace of an old church, Inspector. But since you're here, may I ask if you've examined the vestry lock? It seems rather worn." Craddock's eyebrows rose, but he nodded. "We noticed the scratches. Could be tampering, though it's hard to prove." The door was locked when the vicar found the body, But Grange could have entered earlier, or someone let him in. Or followed him, Miss Marple suggested. Man like Grange, carrying such valuables, would have been cautious. Yet he chose this church, this pew. Why? Craddock rubbed his chin. That's the puzzle. We've confirmed the jewels were stolen from Lady Beatrice Harrow's collection, taken during a gala in Mayfair 3 weeks ago. Grange was a nobody, not the sort to pull off a heist like that. We think he was a courier, moving the goods for someone higher up. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts aligning with his. A courier who became a liability, perhaps. The absence of fingerprints on the pouch suggests a careful mind, Inspector. And the argument Mr. Hargreaves witnessed might it have been a warning? Possibly, Craddock said. We're looking for the man in the grey suit. Hargreaves' description matches what the landlord at the Blue Boar gave us. Mr. Lyle checked out the day after the murder. No trace of him since. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A man who vanishes is either frightened or guilty. I wonder if Mrs. Price saw anything more that evening. She's a meticulous woman, not easily flustered. Craddock jotted a note. I'll speak to her again. You've a knack for this, Miss Marple. Care to join the force? She laughed softly, shaking her head. I'm far too old for that, Inspector. But I do enjoy a puzzle, and St. Mary Mead has no shortage of them. They parted ways, Craddock heading to the station and Miss Marple to Mrs. Price's cottage, a neat dwelling with roses climbing the walls. Mrs. Price kneading dough at her kitchen table welcomed Miss Marple with a wary smile. I've told the police all I know, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. But you've a way of listening, Miss Marple, so I'll tell you too. Over a cup of strong tea, Mrs. Price recounted her evening at the church. I was there till 6, polishing the brasses. The place was empty, or so I thought. But as I locked up, I heard a rustle by the yew trees, like someone stepping on leaves. I looked, and there was a mantle in a grey coat standing just beyond the gate. He saw me and turned away quick, heading toward the village. Miss Marple leaned forward. Did you see his face, Mrs. Price? Not clear, it was getting dark, but he moved like he didn't want to be seen. I thought he might be a tramp, but his coat was too fine for that, and you told no one. Miss Marple asked gently. Mrs. Price flushed. I didn't think it mattered, not till the murder. Then I told Constable Hearn, but he seemed more fussed about the jewels. Miss Marple patted her hand. You've done well to remember, Mrs. Price. Every detail helps. She finished her tea and left, her mind buzzing. The man in the grey coat Lyle perhaps was a recurring figure, seen by Hargreaves, Mrs. Price, and Miss Weatherby. His presence before and after Grange's death suggested a role beyond mere witness. A handler, she wondered, or an enforcer. That afternoon, Miss Marple called on Dolly Bantry, who was pruning her roses with more enthusiasm than skill. Jane, you're positively glowing, Dolly said, tossing a wilted bloom aside. This murder's got you in a tizzy, hasn't it? Miss Marple settled on a garden bench, her basket at her side. It's a sad business, Dolly, but a fascinating one. The village is full of whispers, and they all point to a stranger man in a grey suit. I think he's the key to Grange's death. Dolly's eyes widened. A master criminal, you mean? Like in those detective stories Arthur reads. Not quite, Miss Marple said, smiling. But I suspect Grange was part of a larger scheme. And this man Lyle, they call him, was his contact. The jewels were meant to pass through St. Mary Mead, but something went wrong. Grange was silenced, and the jewels left behind, perhaps as a warning. Dolly shivered, despite the sun. It's chilling, Jane. "Do you think this Lyle is still about?" "I doubt it," Miss Marple said. "He left too quickly for that. But he'll have left traces, and Inspector Craddock is a thorough man." She paused, her gaze distant. "I keep thinking of the crypt, Dolly. Elsie mentioned a man asking about it. If the church was a hiding place, the crypt would be ideal dark, forgotten, and rarely checked." Dolly gasped. "You think there's more loot hidden there?" "Oh, Jane, you must tell Craddock." "I shall," Miss Marple said, rising. "But first, I'll take another look at the church tomorrow. The light of day shows things the shadows hide." That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her cat Tuppence purring at her feet. She picked up her knitting, the needles clicking in a steady rhythm. The village whispers had given her much to ponder Lyle's sudden departure. The scratches on the vestry lock, the rustle by the yew trees. Grange, she was certain, had been a small player in a grander plot, killed to protect a secret. The jewels, left in plain sight, were a puzzle in themselves, their brilliance a stark contrast to the darkness of the crime as she knitted. Her thoughts turned to human nature, which she had studied all her life. "People are predictable," she murmured to Tuppence, "but their secrets are not. This Lyle, whoever he is, thought he could slip through St. Mary Mead unnoticed. But a village sees everything." She set her knitting aside, her mind already planning her next steps. Tomorrow she would visit the church again, and perhaps persuade Craddock to search the crypt. The truth, she felt, was close, waiting to be uncovered like a gem in the dust. Chapter 5. The London connection, the autumn days in St. Mary Mead grew shorter. The mornings cloaked in mist that clung to the hedgerows and softened the outline of St. Michael's Church. The village, though still abuzz with talk of Victor Grange murder, had begun to resume its usual cadence. Milk bottles clinked on doorsteps, and the postman's whistle echoed down the lanes. Yet for Miss Jane Marple, seated in her parlour with a pot of tea and her knitting, the mystery of the dead man and his jewels was far from settled. Her sharp mind, honed by years of observing the small dramas of village life, turned over the clues like pieces of a jigsaw, each fitting into a pattern that grew clearer with every passing hour. The inquest and the village gossip had painted a picture of Grange as a minor cog in a larger machine, a courier for stolen gems, who had met his end in a sacred place. The man in the grey suit, Mr. Lyle, as the Blue Boar's landlord called him, loomed large in Miss Marple's thoughts, his sudden departure suggesting guilt or fear. But the jewels themselves, left glittering in the church, were the true enigma. Why abandon such a prize? And why choose St. Mary Mead, so far from the glittering ballrooms where they had been stolen? Miss Marple's musings were interrupted by a knock at the door. Lily, her maid, ushered in Inspector Dermot Craddock, his overcoat damp from the morning's drizzle. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, accepting a seat by the fire. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I thought you'd want to hear the latest from London." Her eyes brightened, though her expression remained serene. "Not at all, Inspector. I was just thinking of London myself. Pray, what have you learned?" Craddock opened his notebook, his manner brisk but respectful. "The jewels have been positively identified. They belong to Lady Beatrice Harrow, stolen 3 weeks ago during a gala at her Mayfair home. The theft was bold. Someone slipped into her private suite during the dancing, cracked the safe, and vanished with a fortune in gems. No suspects, no witnesses, and the London police were stumped. Granger's name never came up in their inquiries, which makes his role here all the stranger. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a counterpoint to her thoughts. "Lady Beatrice Harrow," she murmured. "I believe my nephew Raymond mentioned her once a society figure, fond of lavish parties but rumoured to be in financial straits. A theft of her own jewels might be convenient, mightn't it?" Craddock's eyebrows rose, but he nodded. "An insurance fraud. It's been considered, but there's no evidence yet." Lady Beatrice was distraught, by all accounts, and the safe showed signs of forced entry. "Still, it's a line we're pursuing." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "What puzzles me is why Grange brought the jewels here. St. Mary Mead isn't exactly a hub for fencers or smugglers." "Indeed not," Miss Marple agreed. "But a quiet village can be a perfect hiding place, especially for something as conspicuous as stolen gems. I wonder, Inspector, if Grange was meant to meet someone in the Church of Contact, perhaps who didn't trust the bustle of London." Craddock jotted a note. "That fits with what we're thinking. Grange was a small-time thief, not the brains of any operation. We suspect he was working for a syndicate, moving the jewels to a safe drop point. But something went wrong. Either he double-crossed them, or they decided he was a liability." Miss Marple nodded, her mind drifting to a similar case years ago, when a smuggler had used a rural chapel to stash contraband, only to be betrayed by his own greed. "The church is an ideal choice," she said. "Public enough to avoid suspicion, private enough for a discreet exchange. But the vestry, Inspector, have you searched it thoroughly? Those scratches on the lock suggest someone was determined to get inside." "We've looked," Craddock said, "but found nothing, no hidden compartments, no more jewels. The crypt, too, was empty, though we checked it after your suggestion. Just cobwebs and old prayer books." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Cobwebs can hide many things, Inspector. But let us return to London. Have you any leads on this Mr. Lyle, the man in the grey suit?" Craddock sighed. "Not much. The address he gave at the Blue Boar was Fulsar boarding house in Bloomsbury that's been empty for months. We've got a description out to the London police, but he's a ghost so far. Mrs. Price's sighting of him by the yew trees is the closest we've come to placing him at the scene." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her gaze thoughtful. "A ghost, you say? Yet he was seen by so many Hargreaves, Miss Weatherby, Mrs. Price. A man who moves so openly, yet vanishes so completely, is no ordinary criminal. I think, Inspector, you might ask my nephew Raymond to make some inquiries in London. He knows the society set, and Lady Beatrice's circle could hold the key." Craddock smiled, accustomed to Miss Marple's knack for leveraging her connections. "I'll do that. Raymond's been helpful before. In the meantime, we're digging into Granger's Pastany Associates. Any debts? If he was part of a syndicate, someone in London knows who pulled the strings." After Craddock left, Miss Marple telephoned her nephew, Raymond West, who lived in a smart flat in Kensington. His voice, warm but tinged with amusement, crackled through the line. "Aunt Jane, are you sleuthing again? St. Mary Mead seems to attract more crime than Scotland Yard." She chuckled. "Not quite, dear, but I need your help. There's been a murder here, and it's tied to a theft in Mayfair Lady Beatrice Harrow's jewels. Could you ask around, discreetly? Find out who she's been entertaining, who might be in her confidence. And if anyone mentions a man in a grey suit, tall and sharp-spoken, do let me know." Raymond promised to inquire, his curiosity piqued. "Lady Beatrice is a character," he said. "Always in the papers, always short of cash. I'll see what I can dig up, But Aunt Jane, do be careful. This sounds like more than village gossip. Miss Marple assured him she would, though her mind was already racing ahead. She spent the afternoon in her garden, pruning her roses with a precision that mirrored her thoughts. The London connection, she felt, was the heart of the mystery. Grange had been a courier, but for whom? And why had the jewels been left behind, as if to taunt the police? She recalled a remark from Dolly Bantry, who had once said that Mayfair was a village of its own, with secrets as tightly guarded as any in St. Mary Mead. Lady Beatrice, with her debts and her gala, was a figure worth watching. That evening, Miss Marple visited the vicarage, where the Clements were hosting a small gathering to discuss the church's restoration. Funder project overshadowed by the murder, but now more urgent than ever. The parlour was crowded with villagers, including Dr. Haydock, Miss Weatherby, and Mr. Hargreaves, whose presence gave Miss Marple an opportunity to probe further. Over sherry and seed cake, she steered the conversation toward the church's security. "It's such a pity about the vestry lock," she said to Mr. Clement, her tone sympathetic. "Mrs. Price mentioned it's been troublesome for years. Has anyone ever tried to repair it?" The vicar shook his head. "We've meant to, but funds are tight. It's an old mechanism from the last century. I suppose it's held up well enough until now." Mr. Hargreaves, nursing a glass of sherry, chimed in. "That lock's been jimmied before, mark my words. I caught a lad trying to pick it years ago, back when I was sexton. He was after the communion silver. A church draws thieves like flies to jam." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "How interesting, Mr. Hargreaves. And this time, with the jewels due, you think someone local might have known about the lock's weakness?" Hargreaves snorted. "Not likely. Most folk here can't tell a sapphire from a glass bead. That Grange fellow brought his trouble with him, and that city chap in the grey coat was part of it. I'd wager my best spade he's the one who did for him." The room buzzed with agreement, but Miss Marple remained silent, her thoughts elsewhere. The lock's history suggested it was a known vulnerability, perhaps exploited by someone who had studied the church's routines. She made a mental note to ask Craddock about the communion silver. Had it been checked after the murder? A thief might target more than jewels. As the evening wound down, Miss Marple walked home under a starlit sky, her umbrella tapping the path. The village was quiet, but her mind was alive with possibilities. The London connection pointed to a sophisticated operation, one that used Grange as a disposable tool. Lady Beatrice's role, whether victim or conspirator, was unclear. But Miss Marple suspected the truth lay in her circle, her guests, her creditors, perhaps even her staff. The man in the grey suit, Lyle, was the link, his presence in St. Mary Mead a deliberate move in a larger game. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple lit the fire and settled with her knitting, her cat Tuppence curling at her feet. She opened a letter from Raymond, delivered that afternoon, which contained a brief but tantalizing update. Lady Beatrice, he wrote, was indeed in financial trouble, her debts a poorly kept secret among the society set. The gala had been a desperate bid to maintain appearances, attended by a mix of aristocrats, financiers, and a few less savoury characters. One name stood out, a Mr. Arthur Kendrick, a businessman with a reputation for sharp dealing, who had been seen leaving the Harrow residence. Late on the night of the theft, Raymond promised to learn more, but cautioned that Kendrick was elusive, known for slipping away when questions arose. Miss Marple's needles paused. Arthur Kendrick. The name stirred no specific memory, but its resonance with Lyle was striking. Could they be one and the same? She recalled Miss Weatherby's description of the man in the shop, sharp-spoken, city-bred, with a manner that suggested authority. Kendrick, if he was Lyle, had come to St. Mary Mead for a purpose, and Granger's death was the result. She rose and crossed to her writing desk, penning a quick note to Craddock with Raymond's findings. "Dear Inspector," she wrote, "my nephew has uncovered a name that may interest you, Arthur Kendrick, a guest at Lady Beatrice's gala. He bears a resemblance to our Mr. Lyle. I suggest checking his movements in London and any ties to Grange. The church, I feel, was a stage, and Kendrick may have been its director." She sealed the letter, intending to post it in the morning as she prepared for bed. Miss Marple stood by her window, gazing at the silhouette of St. Michael's against the night sky. The church, with its ancient stones and hidden corners, had witnessed a crime that spanned villages and cities, drawing together the desperate and the cunning. Grange, she thought, had been a victim of his own ambition, lured by the promise of wealth only to be discarded when he faltered. The jewels, left in the nave, were not an accident but a message, though to whom, she could not yet say. She turned from the window, her mind settling like the embers in the grate. Tomorrow she would visit the church again, this time to examine the chancel where the communion silver was kept. The vestry lock, the crypt, the yew trees all were pieces of the puzzle, but the silver might hold another clue. A village, she murmured to Tuppence, is a small place, but its secrets are as deep as any in London. With that, she extinguished the lamp and retired, her thoughts already weaving the next thread in the tapestry of the crime. Chapter 6. The shadow of Mr. Lyle the mist that had shrouded St. Mary Mead for days lifted on a brisk October morning, revealing a sky of pale blue and a village stirring with the quiet industry of autumn. Leaves skittered across the lanes, and the scent of bonfires hung in the air, mingling with the earthy tang of harvested fields. Miss Jane Marple, stepping out of her cottage with her wicker basket, felt the change in the weather as a kind of clarity, a sharpening of the senses that matched her growing certainty about the murder of Victor Grange. The jewels, the church, the elusive Mr. Lyaldese were not disparate threads, but part of a single, intricate weave, and she was determined to trace it to its source. Her destination was St. Michael's Church, where she intended to examine the chancel and the communion silver, prompted by Mr. Hargreaves' remark about past thefts. But first she stopped at the post office to mail her letter to Inspector Craddock, suggesting he investigate Arthur Kendrick, the London businessman who might be the mysterious Lyle. Miss Weatherby, behind the counter, greeted her with a knowing nod. "Morning, Miss Marple. The village is still all aflutter about that poor man in the church. They're saying now he was part of a smuggling ring, jewels and all." Miss Marple smiled, selecting a few stamps. People do love a story. "Miss Weatherby, have there been any more sightings of strangers? That man in the grey suit, for instance." Miss Weatherby's eyes gleamed with the thrill of gossip. "Not since he left the Blue Boar, but Mrs. Bunce swears she saw a car idling near the church the night before the murderer, black one, with tinted windows. She couldn't see the driver, but it wasn't local. Gone by morning, she said." Miss Marple filed this away, her mind picturing a sleek vehicle lurking in the shadows of the Lichgate. "How curious," she said. "Mrs. Bunce has sharp eyes." "Thank you, Miss Weatherby." She left the post office, her steps quickening as she headed toward the church. A car suggested resources beyond Granger's means, and perhaps a connection to the man in the grey suit. Lyle, or Kendrick, was emerging as a figure of authority. orchestrating events from the sidelines at St. Michael's. The heavy oak door creaked as Miss Marple entered, the nave cool and silent. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting jeweled patterns on the stone floor, a poignant reminder of the gems found beside Granger's body. She moved to the chancel where the communion, silver, chalice, paten, and ciborium was kept in a locked cabinet behind the altar. The cabinet, she noted, was modern, its lock sturdy and unmarred. Unlike the vestries, she examined the silver through the glass door, her eyes lingering on the chalice's ornate base. No signs of tampering, but she recalled Hargreaves' tale of the would-be thief years ago. A church, she thought, was a magnet for the greedy, its sanctity no deterrent to those with larceny in their hearts. As she turned to leave, she spotted Mrs. Price, the cleaning lady, polishing the brass lectern. "Good morning, Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, her tone warm. "You keep the church so beautifully. I was just admiring the communion silver. Has it ever been disturbed, to your knowledge?" Mrs. Price straightened, her cloth pausing. "Not since I've been here, Miss Marple, and that's 15 years. The cabinet's locked tight, and the vicar checks it regular. But I did find something odd the night before the murder, now I think of it. There was a smudge on the chancel floor, like someone tracked in mud. I cleaned it up, but it wasn't there when I left the evening before." Miss Marple's interest quickened. "A smudge near the altar?" "Just by the cabinet," Mrs. Price said. "I thought it was from the vicar's shoes, but he hadn't been in that day. It was dark, like city dirt, not our local clay." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. "A smudge," suggested a visitor, perhaps someone inspecting the cabinet, or waiting for Grange. "You've a keen eye, Mrs. Price. Did you notice anything else that night? A sound, perhaps, or another stranger?" Mrs. Price hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I didn't tell the police this, because I wasn't sure, but as I locked the vestry door, I saw a shadow move by the yew trees. Not the man in the grey coat, I'd know him, but someone shorter, skinnier. I thought it was a trick of the light, but now I wonder." Miss Marple patted her arm. "You've done well to remember, Mrs. Price. Shadows can tell us much." She thanked the woman and left the church, her thoughts circling the new details. A smudge of city dirt, a shadow by the yew's small clues, but they pointed to a second presence. Someone working with or against Lyle. The car Mrs. Bunce had seen added another layer, suggesting a coordinated effort. Her next stop was the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was arranging flowers for the Sunday service. The parlour smelled of chrysanthemums, and Mrs. Clement's face brightened at Miss Marple's arrival. "Jane, how good to see you. I'm trying to keep busy, but this business with the church weighs on me. Have you heard anything new?" Miss Marple settled into a chintz armchair, declining a biscuit but accepting tea. "Only whispers, Maud, but they're beginning to form a picture. I understand a car was seen near the church the night before the murder, black one, with tinted windows. Does that ring any bells?" Mrs. Clement frowned, stirring her tea. "A car, no, but Leonard mentioned something odd. The night before the murder, he was walking home from a parish meeting and saw headlights on the lane behind the church. He thought it was someone lost, as it's not a through road. By the time he reached the gate, the car was gone." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "How interesting. And the vicar saw no one?" "No, but he said the lane was muddy, and there were tyre tracks the next morning. He didn't think much of it until the police asked about visitors." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind fitting the pieces together. A car, tire tracks, a smudge of dirt tour suggested an outsider, likely from London, where Grange's jewels had originated. She steered the conversation to the vestry, probing gently. Mrs. Price mentioned the vestry lock again. Those scratches, do you think someone could have forced it? Mrs. Clement shivered. I hope not, but it's possible. Leonard's been meaning to replace it, but we've no money for such things. The police looked at it, but they didn't find anything amiss. Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions deepening. The vestry, with its faulty lock, was a weak point, a gateway for someone who knew its flaws. She thanked Mrs. Clement and left, intending to meet Inspector Craddock at the police station in Much Benham. The inspector, she hoped, would have news of Arthur Kendrick, the man who might be Lyle. The station was a bustle of activity, with constables sorting reports and a typewriter clacking in the background. Craddock greeted Miss Marple with a wry smile, ushering her into his office. Your letter arrived this morning, Miss Marple, and it stirred things up. Arthur Kendrick is known to us a businessman with a knack for staying just inside the law. He's been linked to shady deals, but nothing sticks. No record of him using the name Lyle, but the description fits all, dark-haired, sharp-spoken. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her hands folded neatly. And his connection to Lady Beatrice Harrow. Craddock flipped through his notes. He was at her gala, all right, seen talking to her late in the evening. The London police are digging into his movements, but he's slippery. Left for Paris the day after the murder, according to his office, though we're checking if he was in St. Mary Mead first. Miss Marple's lips twitched. Paris is a convenient destination for a man who wishes to vanish. But the car, Inspector Mrs. Bunce and the vicar, both mentioned a black car near the church. Could it be Kendrick's? We're looking into it, Craddock said. Kendrick owns a Bentley, black with tinted windows. If it was his, it places him here the night before Grange died. But why kill Grange? If Kendrick's running a syndicate, Grange was just a courier hardly worth the risk. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Unless Grange threatened to talk, a man like him, desperate and greedy, might demand more than his share. Or perhaps he knew too much about Kendrick or Lady Beatrice. The jewels left behind suggest a message. Inspector, not carelessness, but intent. Craddock leaned back, impressed, despite himself. You're building quite a case, Miss Marple. We've got men watching Kendrick's London contacts, and I've asked for a search of the church lane for tyre marks. Anything else you've picked up? Miss Marple recounted Mrs. Price's story, the smudge of dirt, the shadow by the EU. There may have been another man involved, she said. Someone stockier, less conspicuous than Kendrick. A syndicate, as you say, would have layers men to watch, men to act. The vestry lock, too, bears watching. Those scratches are no accident. Craddock jotted down her suggestions, promising to follow up. I'll have the vestry dusted again, and we'll check the chancel floor. You've got a nose for this, Miss Marple. If I didn't know better, I'd say you trained with Sherlock Holmes. She laughed softly, rising to leave. Hardly, Inspector. I simply notice what others miss. Do let me know if Kendrick turns up. A man who flees to Paris is running from something or someone. Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple spent the afternoon in her garden, deadheading her dahlias with a precision that mirrored her thoughts. The shadow of Mr. Lyle Kendrick, she was almost certain, loomed over the case, his presence tying the village to London's underworld. The car, the smudge, the second figure by the usual pointed to a planned operation with Grange as its weakest link. She recalled a case from her youth where a smuggler had been killed by his own gang for threatening to betray them. Grange, she suspected, had met a similar fate, his death a warning to others. That evening, she dined with Dolly Bantry at Bantry Hall, a rambling manor filled with faded grandeur. Over roast pheasant, Dolly pressed for details. "Jane, you're positively alight with this mystery. What's the latest? Is it a gang, like in the films?" Miss Marple smiled, cutting her meat with care. "A gang, yes, but not the sort you see in films. I believe Grange was working for a man named Kendrick, who may be the Mr. Lyle we've heard so much about. He's clever, Dolly, but not clever enough to escape a village's eyes. The church was his stage, but he underestimated its audience." Dolly's eyes widened. "And the jewels, why leave them?" "A message," Miss Marple said. "To the police, perhaps, or to another member of the syndicate. Kendrick killed Grange to silence him, but the jewels were meant to be found, too. Draw attention away from the real prize, whatever that may be." Dolly shivered, reaching for her wine. "You make it sound so calculated. What will you do next?" Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her voice was firm. "I shall wait, Dolly. The truth has a way of surfacing, like a stone in a stream. Inspector Craddock will find Kendrick, and the church will yield its secrets. For now, I'll keep listening to the village and to my own instincts." As she walked home under a crescent moon, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. The shadow of Mr. Lyle was taking shape, his motives and methods clearer with each clue. The smudge, the car, the were signposts, leading her closer to the heart of the crime. She entered her cottage, where Tuppence greeted her with a purr, and settled by the fire with her knitting. "A village," she murmured, "is a small place, but its eyes are everywhere." The needles clicked, each stitch a step toward the truth, and Miss Marple knew that Kendrick, wherever he was, could not hide forever. Chapter 7. The gang's web. The October days in St. Mary Mead had taken on a brittle edge, the air sharp with the promise of frost, and the trees shedding their last leaves in a blaze of amber and crimson. The village, though outwardly calm, simmered with unease, its residents still haunted by the murder in St. Michael's Church. The discovery of Victor Granger's body, surrounded by stolen jewels, had woven a thread of suspicion through the community, and every stranger passing through the high street drew curious glances. Miss Jane Marple, tending her chrysanthemums in the pale morning light, felt the weight of the mystery like a familiar shawl, its folds complex but not impenetrable. Her mind, ever alert, sifted through the clues, the man in the grey suit, the smudge of city dirt, the black carriage, and not in the web she was determined to unravel. Her morning was interrupted by a visit from Inspector Dermot Craddock, who arrived at her cottage with a purposeful stride and a notebook tucked under his arm. Lily, bustling to the door, showed him into the parlour, where Miss Marple was arranging a vase of late roses. "Inspector," she greeted, her eyes bright behind her spectacles, "you look as if you've news. Will you take tea?" Craddock declined with a smile, settling into a chair. "No time for tea, I'm afraid, Miss Marple, but I've got something you'll want to hear. We've had a breakthrough coat, a fellow named Tommy Bell, a petty thief, trying to fence stolen goods in Much Benham. He's got a connection to Grange, and he's talking." Miss Marple's needles, resting in her lap, twitched slightly. "Tommy Bell," she murmured, "a name I haven't heard before. What does he say, Inspector?" Craddock opened his notebook, his voice crisp. Bell's a lowlife, in and out of trouble for years. He claims he knew Grange from a stint in a London doorhouse. Says Grange was working for a syndicate, a group running high-end thefts across the city. They called their leader the broker. No name, no face, just a shadow pulling the strings. Bell swears he was on the fringes, but Grange was deeper in, running errands like carrying those jewels. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. The broker, a theatrical name, but fitting for a mastermind. Did Bell say why Grange came to St. Mary Mead? That's where it gets interesting. Said, according to Bell, the syndicate used rural spots like this as drop points, places too quiet to draw notice. Grange was supposed to deliver the jewels to a contact in the church, but Bell thinks he got greedy, tried to renegotiate his cut. The broker doesn't take kindly to that sort of thing. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts aligning with the inspector's. Greed is a powerful motive, but so is fear. If Grange threatened to expose the broker, it would explain his death and the jewels left behind, perhaps as a warning to others in the gang. She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her knitting. What of Arthur Kendrick? Have you traced him? Craddock's expression tightened. Kendrick's still in Paris, or so his office claims. We've got Interpol watching, but he's slippery. Bell didn't know him by name, but when we described the man in the grey suit, tall, sharp-spoken, city-bred, he nodded, said he'd seen someone like that with Grange in London, giving orders. If Kendrick is Lyle, he's higher up the chain than we thought. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. A chain, indeed. This syndicate sounds like a spider's web, with the broker at its center and men like Grange and Kendrick as its strands. But webs, Inspector, are fragile things when you know where to tug. She leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. Have you searched the church again? Mrs. Price's smudge and the vicar's tire tracks suggest more happened there than we've seen. Craddock jotted a note. We've been over the nave and vestry, but I'll have another look, especially at the crypt. Your idea about it being a hiding place hasn't panned out yet, but Bell mentioned something odd. Grange talked about a safe spot in the church. Somewhere even the syndicate didn't know. Could be nothing, but it's worth checking. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A safe spot, how curious. I wonder if Grange meant to hide the jewels for himself, or if he stumbled on something else. The crypt, Inspector, is worth a second look. It's a place of secrets, even in a village like ours. Craddock rose, tipping his hat. I'll get on it, and I'll keep you posted on Kendrick. You've a knack for seeing the pattern, Miss Marple. If I didn't know better, I'd say you're half a step ahead of Scotland Yard. She laughed softly, waving him off. Flattery, Inspector, will get you nowhere, but do be thorough with the crypt. Spiders hide in dark corners. As Craddock left, Miss Marple returned to her roses, her mind weaving the new information into the tapestry of the case. Tommy Bell's confession confirmed her suspicion of a syndicate, with the broker as its elusive mastermind. Kendrick, whether Lyle or not, was a key player, his presence in St. Mary Mead a deliberate act in a larger drama. But the cryptic safe spot nagged at her, a clue that felt tantalizingly close. Determined to test her instincts, Miss Marple set out for St. Michael's after lunch, her umbrella tucked under her arm despite the clear sky. The church stood serene, its tower casting a long shadow across the graveyard. Inside, the air was cool, the silence broken only by the faint creak of pews settling under their own weight. She moved to the chancel, her eyes scanning the floor. Where Mrs. Price had found the smudge, no trace remained, but she pictured it dark, urban, out of place in a village church. Her gaze drifted to the crypt's entrance, a low archway near the vestry, sealed with a heavy iron gate. She approached the gate, noting its rusted hinges and the padlock securing it. The lock was old but intact, with no visible scratches. Yet, something caught her eye, a faint scuff on the stone step leading down, as if a boot had grazed it. She bent closer, her fingers brushing the mark. It was fresh, the stone slightly discolored, unlike the weathered surface around it. Interesting, she murmured, straightening. The crypt, though searched, might still hold secrets. Her inspection was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Hargreaves, the churchwarden, carrying a broom and a bucket. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his cap, "you're a regular fixture here these days. Looking for ghosts?" She smiled, unruffled. "Not ghosts, Mr. Hargreaves, but answers. Tell me, when was the crypt last opened before the police searched?" Hargreaves scratched his chin, his eyes narrowing. "Months ago, I'd say. We store old records down there. But it's damp and musty, nobody goes in unless they must. The police had a good rummage after the murder, but they found nought but dust." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. "And the gate, has it ever been forced?" "Not that I know," he said, "but it's an old lock, like the vestries. A clever thief could pick it, I reckon. Years back, some lads tried to get in, thinking there was treasure. Just bones and books, though." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind circling the crypt's possibilities. A clever thief, like Grange or Kendrick, might see it as a perfect cash remote, overlooked and secure. She left the church and walked to the vicarage, hoping to glean more from Mrs. Clement about the crypt's history. The vicarage garden was ablaze with late dahlias, and Mrs. Clement was clipping herbs when Miss Marple arrived. "Jane, what a treat," Mrs. Clement said, brushing dirt from her hands. "Come in for a cuppa. You look like you're on a mission." Miss Marple followed her to the kitchen, where the kettle was already simmering. "I am, in a way," she said, settling at the table. "I've been thinking about the crypt, Maud. Mr. Hargreaves says it's rarely used, but has anyone ever mentioned hiding things there? Valuables, perhaps, or documents?" Mrs. Clement frowned, pouring tea. "The crypt, it's a gloomy place, full of old parish registers and broken pews. Leonard says it was used for storage during the war food rations, that sort of thing, but nothing valuable. Why do you ask?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her tone casual but probing. "A man like Grange, carrying stolen jewels, might look for a hiding place. The crypt is out of the way, and that scuff on the step suggests someone was there recently. I wonder if the syndicate used it before." Mrs. Clement shivered. What a thought. The police looked, didn't they? But I suppose a clever criminal could hide something small. Leonard keeps the key in his study, but it's not locked away. Anyone could borrow it if they knew where. To look, Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Anyone with access to the vicarage, you mean? How many people come and go here, Maud?" "Oh, dozens," Mrs. Clement said. "Parishioners, the choir, the Women's Institute. We're an open house, Jane. But surely no one local would be mixed up in this." "I hope not," Miss Marple said, though her mind was less certain. A syndicate, she knew, could exploit local trust, using an insider to scout locations like the church. She thanked Mrs. Clement and left, her thoughts turning to the key. If Grange or Kendrick had accessed the crypt, they had planned meticulously, perhaps with help. Her next move was a call to Raymond West, her nephew, who answered from his London flat with his usual mix of affection and amusement. Aunt Jane, you're turning St. Mary Mead into a crime capital. What's the latest? Miss Marple recounted Tommy Bell's confession and the syndicate's use of rural drop points. Raymond, dear, I need you to dig deeper into Arthur Kendrick. Inspector Craddock says he's in Paris, but I suspect he's closer to the heart of this than we know. Look into his associates, especially anyone tied to Lady Beatrice Harrow. And if you hear of a figure called the Broker, do take note. Raymond promised to investigate, his voice tinged with excitement. The Broker sounds like something out of a thriller. I'll check with my club. Kendrick's name pops up there sometimes. Lady Beatrice, Tushy's, been hosting fewer parties since the theft, but her butler's been seen with some shady types. I'll let you know what I find. Miss Marple hung up, satisfied. Raymond's connections, though often dismissed as frivolous by his literary friends, were a goldmine for gossip, and gossip, she knew, was the raw material of truth. She spent the afternoon in her parlour, knitting and thinking, her cat Tuppence dozing by the fire. The syndicate's web was becoming clearer Grange as the courier, Kendrick as the enforcer, the Broker as the unseen master. But the crypt, with its scuff and its secrets, was the key. A place where the web's strands converged. By evening, Craddock telephoned with news that sent a thrill through her. Miss Marple, you were right about the crypt, he said, his voice taut with excitement. We searched it again, top to bottom, and found a hidden compartment in the wall-loose stone behind a stack of old hymeneal. Inside was a note, folded tight, in code. We're having it deciphered, but it's a list of some kind, names or places, maybe. Miss Marple's heart quickened. A list, she said. How extraordinary. It could be the syndicate's contacts, or a record of their drops. Have you checked the communion silver yet, Inspector? The smudge Mrs. Price found was near the cabinet. We're on it, Craddock said. The cabinet's clean, but we're dusting the chancel again. That note's our best lead yet. If it points to Kendrick or the Broker, we're closer to cracking this. Miss Marple congratulated him, her mind already racing ahead. A coded note suggested a level of sophistication beyond Granger's capabilities, pointing to Kendrick or his master. She pictured the crypt, its damp walls hiding a secret that Grange might have discovered, perhaps sealing his fate. The Broker, she suspected, was not just a thief but a strategist, using men like Grange and Kendrick as pawns in a game of wealth and power. That night, Miss Marple dined alone, her thoughts consumed by the case. She spread a map of St. Mary Mead on her table, tracing the lanes around the church. The tyre tracks, the car, the shadow by the Usual suggested a network of movement, a web stretching from London to this quiet village. The note, she felt, was the key to unravelling it, a glimpse into the Broker's mind. She recalled a case from her youth, where a coded letter had exposed a smuggling ring, its leader betrayed by his own meticulous records. History, she thought, had a way of repeating itself. As she prepared for bed, Miss Marple stood by her window, gazing at the church's silhouette against the starry sky. The crypt's secret had shifted the case, bringing the syndicate's web into focus. Kendrick, whether in Paris or closer, was a spider she intended to trap, and the Broker, though hidden, could not remain so forever. A web, she murmured to Tuppence, is only as strong as its weakest strand. She extinguished the lamp, her mind alight with the next steps, certain that St. Mary Mead, with its watchful eyes, would yield the truth in time. Chapter 8. The Trap is Set. The village of St. Mary Mead woke to a day of deceptive calm. The October sun, casting long shadows across the dew-soaked lanes and gilding the rooftops with a fleeting warmth, The murder of Victor Grange, though still a topic of fervent whispers, had begun to fade into the rhythm of daily life milk deliveries. The clatter of the baker's van, the chatter of children on their way to school, yet beneath this surface tranquility, a current of anticipation ran through Miss Jane Marple's mind as she sat in her parlour, her knitting needles clicking in time with her thoughts. The discovery of the coded note in the church's crypt had shifted the investigation, illuminating the contours of a criminal syndicate with Victor Grange as its ill-fated pawn. The man in the grey suit, Arthur Kendrick, alias Mr. Lylund, ever larger, a spider at the edge of a web spun by the mysterious broker. Miss Marple, with her quiet resolve, was determined to draw him out. Her morning began with a visit from Inspector Dermot Craddock, who arrived at her cottage with an air of suppressed excitement. Lily, bustling to the door, showed him in, and Miss Marple set aside her knitting to offer him a chair by the fire. "Inspector," she said, her eyes bright behind her spectacles, "you look as if you've turned a corner in our puzzle. Have you deciphered the note from the crypt?" Craddock nodded, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "We have, Miss Marple, and it's a goldmine. The code was simpler, substitution cipher, but the contents are explosive. It's a list of drop points, dates, and initials, likely for the syndicate's operations. One entry mentions St. Mary Mead, dated the night Grange died, with the initials AK. We're certain it's Kendrick." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "Arthur Kendrick, our Mr. Lyle. How careless of him to leave such a trail. But then, arrogance is often a criminal's undoing. What else does the note reveal?" Craddock spread the paper on the table, pointing to a series of cryptic entries. "Other locations, mostly rural, like this one, and names we're cross-checking with Scotland Yard. The broker's initials don't appear, which suggests he's careful, but Kendrick's do, repeatedly. He's the linchpin running the syndicates. Field work, we've also got a lead on his return from Paris back in London, lying low in a flat in Chelsea. We're watching him, but we need to catch him in the act." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, a soft counterpoint to her thoughts. "A trap, then," she said. "Kendrick is cautious, but he's also bold. If he believes the police are closing in, he might return to St. Mary Mead to tie up loose ends, perhaps to retrieve something hidden in the church, or to silence another witness. Have you considered using the village to lure him?" Craddock's eyes narrowed, a spark of admiration in them. "You're reading my mind, Miss Marple. I've been thinking of leaking a story to the press, a rumour that we've found a witness to Grange's murder, someone who saw Kendrick in the church. If he's as nervous as we think, it might draw him out. But it's risky. We'd need to protect the village." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. "St. Mary Mead is small, Inspector, but its eyes are sharp. A public event of fate, perhaps, in the churchyard would give you cover to watch for Kendrick without alarming the villagers. Everyone attends, and a stranger would stand out like a crow in a flock of doves." Craddock jotted a note, his expression resolute. "A fate. That's brilliant. The Women's Institute is always keen for a fundraiser, and it'd give us a chance to station men discreetly. I'll speak to the vicar and Mrs. Clement. If Kendrick takes the bait, we'll have him." Miss Marple's gaze softened, though her voice was firm. "Be thorough, Inspector. Kendrick is no fool, and the broker may be watching. The note suggests a network, and networks protect their own. I wonder, have you checked the communion silver again? Mrs. Price's smudge was near the cabinet, and it's possible Kendrick or his accomplice left something behind. "We're on it," Craddock said. "We dusted the cabinet again, no prints, but we found a tiny scratch on the lock, barely noticeable. Could be nothing, but we're testing for residue. You've got a knack for pointing us in the right direction, Miss Marple." She smiled, waving off the compliment. "I merely see what's there, Inspector. Do let me know how the fate plans progress. I'll be there, of course, with my knitting and my eyes open." Craddock left, his step lighter, and Miss Marple returned. To her roses, her mind weaving the trap's details. A fate would bring the village together, its bustle a perfect stage for Kendrick's return if he dared. She pictured him, tall and sharp-spoken, slipping through the crowd. Unaware of the net closing around him, by midday, the village was abuzz with news of the fate, hastily organized by Mrs. Clement and the Women's Institute for the following Saturday. The churchyard would host stalls for cakes, jams, and second-hand books, with a tombola and a children's choir to draw the crowds. Miss Marple, invited to tea at the vicarage to discuss arrangements, found Mrs. Clement in a flurry of activity, her kitchen table covered with lists and ribbons. "Jane, it's madness," Mrs. Clement said, pouring tea. "A fate in a week, and with all this talk of murder. But Leonard thinks it'll lift spirits, and the Restoration Fund needs it. The police asked us to keep it quiet, but they're involved somehow constables in plain clothes," they said. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene. "A wise move, Maud. The village needs cheer, and the police need eyes. Have you noticed any strangers asking about the fate? Or anyone curious about the church?" Mrs. Clement frowned, stirring her tea. "Now that you mention it, Elsie, our cook, said a man telephoned yesterday asking about the churchyard, about parking for the fate. She thought he sounded posh, not local. She told him to call the vicar, but he rang off." Miss Marple's interest quickened. "Posh, you say, did Elsie describe his voice?" "Sharp," she said, "like a lawyer or a businessman." She didn't catch a name, but it struck her as odd with all that's happened. Mrs. Clement shivered. "Do you think it's that man in the grey suit, Jane?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone thoughtful, "or someone connected to him. Criminals are curious creatures, Maud. They can't resist checking their tracks." She changed the subject to the Fates cake stall, but her mind was elsewhere, picturing Kendrick or an associate probing the village's defenses. The telephone call, she suspected, was a test, a sign that the syndicate was rattled. Over the next few days, Miss Marple kept a low profile, tending her garden and knitting by her fire, but her senses were attuned to the village's pulse. She visited the shop, where Miss Weatherby reported no new strangers but plenty of speculation about the fate. "They're saying it's a cover for the police," Miss Weatherby confided, "to catch that murderer." "Is it true, Miss Marple, miss?" Marple smiled, selecting a tin of biscuits. "The police are always watchful, Miss Weatherby, but a fate is just a fate. I'm sure we'll all enjoy it." She left, her basket heavier but her thoughts lighter. The village's gossip, though exaggerated, would amplify the rumor of a witness, making Kendrick's return more likely. On the eve of the fate, Miss Marple received a call from Raymond West, his voice crackling with excitement. "Aunt Jane, I've got something on Kendrick," he said. "My club's been buzzing about him. He's back in London, all right, but keeping a low profile. One of my chums saw him at a discreet restaurant in Soho, meeting a woman tall, elegant, sounded like Lady Beatrice Harrow herself. They were arguing, he said, about money and loose ends." Miss Marple's heart quickened. Lady Beatrice and Kendrick. How fascinating, Raymond. Did your friend hear anything else? Only that Kendrick mentioned a village job that went wrong. He sounded nervous, kept looking over his shoulder. I've passed it to Craddock, but I thought you'd want to know. Be careful, Aunt Jane. This lot sounds dangerous. Miss Marple assured him she would, her mind racing. Lady Beatrice's involvement, whether as victim or conspirator, was a twist she had half expected, given the rumours of her debts. Kendrick's mention of a village job confirmed his role in Granger's death, and his nervousness suggested he feared exposure. The fate, she felt, was the perfect moment to catch him off guard. Saturday dawned bright. The churchyard transformed into a kaleidoscope of colour and sound. Stalls lined the paths, their awnings fluttering in the breeze, and the air was thick with the scent of toffee apples and fresh-baked scones. Children darted between the tambola and the hoopla, their laughter mingling with the choir's rendition of all things bright and beautiful. Miss Marple, in her best tweed coat and a hat adorned with a single rose, arrived early, her knitting bag slung over her arm. She settled on a bench near the lich gate, her eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of Kendrick. Inspector Craddock, disguised in a tweed jacket and flat cap, mingled with the villagers, his constables posted at key points behind. The cake stall, near the book table, and by the church door. The rumour of a witness, leaked to a local paper, had spread like wildfire, and Miss Marple sensed a tension in the air, a collective holding of breath. She watched as Mrs. Clement bustled between stalls, her face flushed with pride, and Mr. Hargreaves manned the tambola, his gruff voice coaxing pennies from passers-by. As the afternoon wore on, Miss Marple's attention sharpened. The crowd was a mix of familiar faces: Miss Weatherby, Mrs. Price, Dr. Haydock, but a few strangers caught her eye. A man in a brown overcoat lingered by the jam stall, his gaze too casual. Another, in a navy suit, hovered near the church door. Checking his watch, she made mental notes, her fingers busy with her knitting, but her true focus was the lich gate, where Grange and Kendrick had argued days before his death. Just past 3 o'clock, she saw him. A tall figure in a grey suit, his trilby hat pulled low, appeared at the edge of the churchyard, his movements deliberate but wary. He paused by the lich gate, scanning the crowd, his posture tense. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she kept her eyes on her knitting, her peripheral vision tracking him. It was Kendrick, she was certain. The sharp features, the city-bred confidence, the faint unease in his stride. She caught Craddock's eye across the yard, giving a slight nod. The inspector, feigning interest in a bookstall, signalled his men. With a subtle gesture, Kendrick moved closer, weaving through the crowd, his gaze fixed on the church door. Miss Marple watched as he hesitated, then slipped toward the lich gate, as if drawn to the scene of his crime. Her needles clicked faster, her mind racing. He was here for a reason, perhaps, to retrieve something hidden, or to ensure no witness remained. As Kendrick reached the lich gate, Craddock gave the signal. 2 constables, disguised as villagers, closed in from either side, their movements swift but unobtrusive. Kendrick sensed the trap too late, his hand darting to his pocket as he turned to flee. But a 3rd constable, hidden in the shrubbery, blocked his path, and within moments he was surrounded. The crowd, sensing drama, fell silent, their eyes wide as Craddock stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Arthur Kendrick, you're under arrest for the murder of Victor Grange and suspicion of theft. Come quietly and we'll sort this out at the station." Kendrick's face twisted, a flash of defiance giving way to resignation. "You've got nothing on me," he muttered, but his shoulders slumped as the constables cuffed him. The villagers erupted in whispers, and Miss Marple, rising from her bench, approached Craddock with a serene smile. "Well done, Inspector," she said softly. "Patience, as I always say, is a village virtue." Craddock tipped his cap, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. "Your fate idea was the clincher, Miss Marple." He couldn't resist checking the ground. "We'll take it from heck. Got a lot to answer for." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on Kendrick as he was led away. The trap had worked, but the web was not fully unraveled. The broker, she suspected, was still out there, and Kendrick's arrest might force their hand. She returned to her bench, her knitting resumed, but her mind was already planning the next move. The fete continued, its cheer restored, but for Miss Marple the day's work was far from over. The church, with its secrets, had given up one villain, but the mastermind remained, and she was determined to find them. Chapter 9. The broker unmasked the arrest of Arthur Kendrick at the St. Mary Mead. Churchyard fate sent ripples through the village, like a stone dropped into a still pond. By Sunday morning, the high street hummed with whispers, each villager adding their own flourish to the tale of the man in the grey suit, caught in the act of skulking by the lich gate. Miss Jane Marple, tending her late-blooming asters in the crisp October light, listened to Lily's breathless recounting of the gossip with her usual serene attention. The fete had been a triumph, not just for the Women's Institute's coffers, but for Inspector Craddock's trap, which had snared a key player in the murder of Victor Grange. Yet Miss Marple's mind, sharp as the frost on her garden gate, was far from satisfied. Kendrick, she suspected, was but a strand in the syndicate's web, and the true master, the elusive broker, remained hidden. Their identity a shadow cast across the case. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Inspector Craddock, his face weary but determined, stepped into the parlour at Lily's invitation, his notebook tucked under his arm. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, accepting a seat by the fire. "I hope I'm not intruding, but we've had developments overnight, and I knew you'd want to hear them." Miss Marple set aside her gardening gloves, her eyes bright with interest. "Not at all, Inspector. I was just thinking of Mr. Kendrick. Has he been forthcoming?" Craddock opened his notebook, his voice taut with the weight of new information. "More than we expected, though he's still holding back. Kendrick's admitted to being the syndicate's lieutenant, handling the logistics of their theft drop points, couriers, the lot. He confirmed Grange was a courier, tasked with delivering Lady Beatrice Harrow's jewels to St. Mary Mead for a buyer. But Grange got greedy, demanded a bigger cut, and threatened to squeal to the police. Kendrick says he killed him with a brass candlestick from the chancel, wiped it clean, and left it in place." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind picturing the heavy candlesticks she had seen in the church, their polished surfaces gleaming in the candlelight. "A candlestick," she murmured. "How fittingly dramatic. And the jewels left beside. Grange, why not take them?" Craddock leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "That's where it gets murky. Kendrick claims he panicked, thought the jewels would throw us off his trail by pointing to a botched theft. But I don't buy it. He's too sharp for panic. He hinted at orders from above, someone he calls the broker. Says the broker wanted the jewels found to send a message to the syndicate. Cross me, and you're done." Miss Marple's knitting needles, retrieved from her basket, began their soft rhythm. "A message," she said. Yes, that fits. The broker is a strategist, using fear to control their network. But Kendrick knows more than he's saying. Inspector, have you pressed him on the broker's identity? We have, Craddock said, flipping a page in his notebook. He's terrified, claims the broker has eyes everywhere. But he let slip a detail, said the broker was closer to Lady Beatrice Harrow than anyone realized. We're digging into her circle now, cross-referencing the coded note from the crypt. One name keeps coming up, but Kendrick won't confirm it. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze steady. Lady Beatrice herself, perhaps. My nephew Raymond mentioned her debts and her meeting with Kendrick in London. A woman in her position, desperate for funds, might orchestrate a theft for insurance money, using the syndicate as her tool. Craddock's eyebrows rose, a spark of admiration in his eyes. You're ahead of us again, Miss Marple. We've been looking at Lady Beatrice, but it's a stretch she's the victim, after all. Still, her financial troubles are no secret, and Kendrick's hint points to someone with access to her home. We're pulling her bank records and interviewing her staff. If she's the broker, it's a hell of a cover. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts circling the coded note and Kendrick's confession. A cover, indeed. Lady Beatrice has the charm and connections to run such a scheme, but she'd need a lieutenant like Kendrick to handle the dirty work. The note, Inspector, does it mention her, even indirectly? Not by name, Craddock said, but one set of initials, BH, appears next to a London drop point, dated before the gala theft. It could be Beatrice Harrow or someone else. We're decoding the rest, but it's slow work. Kendrick's clammed up about it, says he'll talk more if we guarantee protection. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Protection from the broker. He's more afraid of them than of prison. That tells us much, Inspector. The broker is ruthless, and Kendrick's arrest will have rattled them. I wonder if we might use that fear to our advantage. Have you considered letting Kendrick believe you're closing in on the broker? It might loosen his tongue. Craddock jotted a note, his expression resolute. Good idea. We'll lean on him, make him think we've got more than we do. In the meantime, I'm heading to London tomorrow to interview Lady Beatrice. Want to come along? Your instincts might spot something we miss. Miss Marple smiled, shaking her head. Tempting, Inspector, but I'm better suited to St. Mary Mead. My nephew Raymond can keep you informed of London's whispers. Do ask Lady Beatrice about her gala guests, especially any who seemed overly curious about her jewels, and check her safe, if you can. A forced entry can be staged, you know. Craddock tipped his hat, rising to leave. I'll do that, and I'll keep you posted. You've a way of seeing through the fog, Miss Marple. If Lady Beatrice is our broker, we'll need all the clarity we can get. After Craddock left, Miss Marple telephoned Raymond, catching him at his Kensington flat. His voice, warm with amusement, crackled through the line. Aunt Jane, you're turning this murder into a saga. Craddock's been in touch, says you're pointing him at Lady Beatrice. What's the latest? Miss Marple recounted Kendrick's confession and the suspicion around Lady Beatrice. Raymond, dear, I need you to dig deeper into her circle. Kendrick mentioned the broker being close to her. Look for anyone who's been unusually loyal or secretive. A butler, a secretary, even a friend. And if you hear of a BH in her orbit, let me know at once. Raymond promised to investigate, his tone eager. Lady Beatrice is a magnet for hangers-on. I'll check with my club and a few society contacts. Her butler, by the way, has a reputation for discretion, too much, some say. I'll see what I can find." Miss Marple hung up, satisfied. Raymond's knack for gossip was a treasure, and she trusted him to unearth the subtle connections that eluded the police. She spent the afternoon in her garden, pruning her asters with a precision that mirrored her thoughts. Kendrick's admission had cracked the syndicate's facade, but the broker's identity was the key. Lady Beatrice, with her debts and her charm, was a compelling candidate. But Miss Marple's instincts warned her against Heist. The broker, she felt, was a master of deception, hiding in plain sight. That evening, she visited Dolly Bantry at Bantry Hall, where the fire roared and the claret glowed in crystal glasses. Dolly, ever eager for intrigue, pounced on the news of Kendrick's arrest. "Jane, it's like a detective novel. This Kendrick fellow, killing Grange with a candlestick. How positively gothic. But you don't think he's the top dog, do you?" Miss Marple, sipping her claret, shook her head. "No, Dolly. Kendrick is a lieutenant, not a general. The broker is the true mastermind, and I suspect there's someone we've overlooked. Lady Beatrice Harrow is a possibility here. Debts make her desperate enough, but it could be someone closer, someone trusted. The coded note mentioned ABH, which might be her, or it might not." Dolly's eyes widened. "A woman, oh Jane, that's deliciously wicked. Do you think she planned the whole thing, stealing her own jewels, killing Grange to keep him quiet?" "It's possible," Miss Marple said, her tone thoughtful. "But criminals, Dolly, are like actors. They play roles to hide their true selves. Lady Beatrice's distress could be genuine, or it could be a performance. I've asked Raymond to look into her household. A servant, perhaps, or a confidant might be pulling the strings." Dolly leaned forward, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "What will you do next? You can't just sit here knitting while Craddock chases this broker." Miss Marple smiled, setting her glass down. "I shall wait, Dolly, and listen. The village has told us much already, and London will tell us more. Kendrick's fear is a crack in the syndicate's armor, and cracks widen under pressure. The broker will make a mistake, and when they do, we'll be ready." The next morning, Miss Marple received a telegram from Craddock, sent from London. "Kendrick, talking, implicates BH as broker. Interviewing Lady Beatrice today. Will call tonight." She read it twice, her heart quickening. The initials BH. Confirmed her suspicions, but she cautioned herself against certainty. Lady Beatrice was too obvious, too exposed. She spent the day in quiet routine, knitting, writing letters, tending her garden, but her mind was in London, picturing Craddock's interview in a Mayfair drawing room. By evening, Craddock telephoned, his voice weary but triumphant. "Miss Marple, we've got her," he said. Lady Beatrice broke down under questioning. Kendrick's confession, plus the coded note, was too much. She admitted to being the broker, organized the theft of her own jewels for insurance money, used the syndicate to cover her tracks. Grange was her courier, but when he threatened to expose her, she ordered Kendrick to kill him. The jewels were left to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind sifting through the revelation. "Lady Beatrice," she said softly, "how extraordinary, and yet not unexpected. Her debts, her connections. Fits, but tell me, Inspector, how did she manage the syndicate? A woman of her station, running a criminal network, is no small feat." Craddock chuckled, a note of awe in his voice. "She's a piece of work, I'll give her that. Used her. Social clout to recruit Kendrick was her lover, believe it or not, and utterly loyal until we turned the screws. She ran the syndicate from her drawing room, passing orders through coded letters and trusted servants. The gala theft was her idea, staged the break-in, claimed the insurance, and planned to sell the jewels abroad. Grange was the weak link, and she cut him out. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts aligning with the inspector's account. A lover, she murmured. That explains Kendrick's devotion. And the note in the crypto instructions, I presume. Exactly, Craddock said. The initials BH were hers. We found more coded letters in her safe, matching the cipher. She's in custody now, and the syndicate's crumbling. Her lieutenants are turning on each other to save their skins. Miss Marple's voice was calm but firm. Well done, Inspector. But do be thorough with her staff. A woman like Lady Beatrice would have a safety net, someone to take the fall if needed. Her butler, perhaps. Raymond mentioned he was unusually discreet. We're on it, Craddock said. The butler's being questioned, and we're searching her house for more evidence. You called it Miss Marple. Lady Beatrice was the spider, and St. Mary Mead was her web's edge. I'll be back tomorrow to wrap things up. Care to join? Me for a debrief. Miss Marple declined with a smile. I'll leave London to you, Inspector. St. Mary Mead is my domain, and it's quite enough for me. Do give my regards to Raymond. She hung up, her mind settling like the embers in her. Great. Lady Beatrice, as the broker, was a twist she had anticipated. Yet it carried a pang of sadness, a woman of privilege, undone by her own ambition. She recalled a similar case from her youth, where a society matron had turned to blackmail to save her fortune, only to be betrayed by her own confidant. Human nature, Miss Marple thought, was a constant, whether in Mayfair or a village. That night she dined with Mrs. Clement at the vicarage, where the mood was lighter, the fates success. A bomb after weeks of strain. Over shepherd's pie, Mrs. Clement pressed for details. Jane, they're saying in the village that you helped catch the killer. Is it true that Lady Beatrice was behind it all? Miss Marple, cutting her pie with care, nodded. It seems so, Maud. She was a clever woman, but cleverness without conscience is a dangerous thing. The church was her stage, and Grange her sacrifice. But it's over now, and St. Michael's can be a sanctuary again. Mrs. Clement sighed, her relief palpable. I hope so. Leonard's planning a service to rededicate the church. Will you come? Of course, Miss Marple said, her eyes warm. A village heals best together. She left the vicarage under a starry sky, her umbrella tapping the path. The broker unmasked, the syndicate whodunit was a victory, yet her mind lingered on the human cost. Lady Beatrice, Kendrick, Granjall, caught in a web of their own making, each undone by greed or fear. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her cat Tuppence purring at her feet. She picked up her knitting, the needles clicking in a steady rhythm. The case was nearly closed, but she knew the village would watch her, expecting her to unravel the next mystery that drifted into St. Mary Mead. People, she murmured too. Tuppence are never quite what they seem, but a village sees through them in the end. The fire crackled, and Miss Marple knitted on, content in the knowledge that truth, like her stitches, always found its pattern. Chapter 10. The Confrontation. The revelation that Lady Beatrice Harrow was the mastermind behind the syndicate. The shadowy broker who had orchestrated Victor Granger's murder settled over St. Mary Mead like a late autumn fog chilling, pervasive, but soon to dissipate under the light of truth. The village, though still abuzz with the scandal of a Mayfair heiress turned criminal, began to reclaim its quiet rhythm. The churchyard, scene of Arthur Kendrick's dramatic arrest, now bore only the traces of the fates' merriment, grass and a few forgotten bunting flags fluttering in the October breeze. Miss Jane Marple, pruning her lavender bushes in the soft morning light, felt a quiet satisfaction at the case's resolution. Yet her mind lingered on the final act, the confrontation that had unmasked Lady Beatrice. Her instincts, honed by years of observing human nature, told her that even now loose threads remained, waiting to be tied. Her morning was interrupted by a telephone call from Inspector Dermot Craddock, his voice crackling with the fatigue of a man who had spent days in London's bustle. "Miss Marple," he said, "I'm back in Much Benham, wrapping up the paperwork on the Harrow case. I thought you'd like a full account of how it went down with Lady Beatrice. Care to join me for tea at the station this afternoon?" Miss Marple, wiping soil from her hands, smiled into the receiver. "That would be most enlightening, Inspector. Shall we say 3 o'clock? I'll bring some of my shortbread lilies. Been experimenting with a new recipe." She hung up, her thoughts already drifting to the confrontation in Mayfair. Lady Beatrice, with her charm and cunning, had been a formidable adversary. But no one, Miss Marple knew, could outrun the truth forever. Before heading to the station, she visited the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was preparing for the church's rededication service, a symbolic cleansing of the sanctuary after its grim association with murder. The parlour was a flurry of activity, with hymnals stacked on the table, and a vase of chrysanthemums lending a touch of cheer. "Jane," Mrs. Clement said, offering a scone, "you're the talk of the village. They say you pointed the police straight at that dreadful Lady Beatrice." "How did you know?" Miss Marple accepted the scone, her expression serene. "I didn't know, Maud, not at first, but people revealed themselves in their actions and their silences. Lady Beatrice's debts, her connection to Kendrick, the coded noted, all pointed to a mind that thrived on control. She was clever, but cleverness is no match for a villager's eyes." Mrs. Clement shivered, pouring tea. "To think she used our church for her schemes. Leonard's been beside himself, but this service will help. Will you speak at it, Jane? The parish would love to hear your thoughts." Miss Marple shook her head, her eyes warm but firm. "I'm no speaker, Maud. My place is in the pews, listening and watching, but I'll be there, and I'm sure the service will restore the church's peace." She left the vicarage, her basket heavier with scones, and her mind lighter with purpose. The confrontation with Lady Beatrice, she felt, would clarify the syndicate's inner workings, perhaps revealing one last secret at the Much Benham police station, a squat brick building with a perpetually creaking door. Craddock greeted her with a tired but genuine smile. The office smelled of ink and coffee, its walls lined with filing cabinets and a single, wilting aspidistra. He cleared a space on his desk, setting out teacups and a plate for Miss Marple's shortbread. "You're a lifesaver, Miss Marple," he said, taking a bite. "London was a madhouse, but we got what we needed. Let me walk you through it." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her hands folded neatly. "I'm all ears, Inspector. How did Lady Beatrice react when you confronted her?" Craddock leaned back, his notebook open but untouched, the story vivid in his memory. "It was Tuesday morning, in her Mayfair drawing-room, all velvet curtains and gilt mirrors, like a stage set. We had Kendrick's confession, the coded note, and a stack of letters we found in her safe, all in the same cipher. I laid it out plain. We knew she was the broker, that she'd planned the jewel theft for insurance money, and that she'd ordered Granger's death when he threatened to talk. She tried to bluff at first tears, indignation, the whole society. Dame Act said she was the victim, betrayed by her own staff. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A performance, no doubt. But the evidence was too strong, I presume. Craddock nodded, sipping his tea. Too strong by half. We showed her the note from the crypt, with her initials BH, next to the St. Mary Mead drop. Then we brought in Kendrick's statement, detailing how she recruited him as her lover and lieutenant, how she used her gala to stage the theft, and how she gave the order to kill Grange. The letters clinched its correspondence with other syndicate members, all coded, all in her handwriting. Her face went white as chalk, and she collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Miss Marple's needles, retrieved from her bag, clicked softly. Sobbing, but not defeated, I imagine. A woman like Lady Beatrice would have a fallback, a way to shift blame. "You're spot on," Craddock said, a note of admiration in his voice. She tried to pin it on her butler. A man named Stokes claimed he was the real broker, using her name to cover his tracks. Said he had access to her safe, knew her financial troubles, and manipulated her into the scheme. But Stokes cracked under questioning, admitted he ran errands for her, delivered messages, but swore he never knew the full plan. His alibis checked out, and the letters were in her hand, not his. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts aligning with the inspector's account. A butler is a convenient scapegoat, but Lady Beatrice underestimated your thoroughness. What of the syndicate's other members? Kendrick mentioned lieutenants. Have they been rounded up? Craddock flipped a page in his notebook. We're getting there. Kendrick's singing like a canary now, naming names to save his skin. We've arrested 2 of his men in London, small-time crooks who handled the fences. The rest are scattering. But the coded letters give us leads drop points in Kent, Sussex, even Cornwall. The syndicate's crumbling, Miss Marple. Lady Beatrice was the brains, and without her, it's just a pack of rats fighting over scraps. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, a fitting end for such a web. But tell me, Inspector, how did Lady Beatrice explain the jewels left beside Grange? Kendrick's story of panic never rang true. Craddock leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. She admitted it was deliberate. The jewels were a decoy, meant to make the police think Grange was killed in a botched robbery. She wanted the insurance payout, but she also wanted the syndicate to see what happened to traitors. Granger's death was a warning step out of line, and you're next. She told Kendrick to leave the jewels and make it look sloppy, to throw us off the syndicate's trail. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze thoughtful, a warning and a distraction. How like her to play 2 games at once, and the candlestick. She confirmed Kendrick's weapon. She did, Craddock said. Said she chose it herself, told Kendrick to use something from the church, something that wouldn't trace back to them. The candlestick was perfect heavy, common, and already. There he wiped it clean and put it back, thinking we'd never suspect. If you hadn't pushed us to check the chancel, we might have missed it. Miss Marple waved off the praise, her expression modest. I merely noticed what was out of place, Inspector. A church is a house of order, and murder disrupts that order. But what of Lady Beatrice's motive? Beyond the insurance money, what drove her to such lengths? Craddock sighed, rubbing his temple. Greed, mostly, but pride, too. She was drowning in debt mortgages, gambling losses, a lifestyle she couldn't sustain. The insurance was a lifeline, But running the syndicate gave her power, a thrill she couldn't resist. She saw herself as untouchable, a queen moving pawns like Grange and Kendrick. When we showed her the evidence, she said something chilling. I built an empire, and one weak link won't bring it down. Even in defeat, she's unrepentant. Miss Marple's eyes softened, a trace of sadness in them. Pride is a dangerous master, Inspector. Lady Beatrice built her empire, but she forgot that empires fall when their foundations are rotten. Have you searched her house thoroughly? A woman like her would have a contingency, a hidden cache or a trusted ally. Craddock jotted a note, his expression resolute. We're still at it. Her safe had more than letters cache, fake passports, even a ledger of syndicate profits. We're checking her country estate, too, in case she stashed anything there. Her staff's being questioned, but most are loyal out of fear, not love. The butler's the weakest link he's talking, hoping for leniency. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to her nephew Raymond's mention of the butler's discretion. A butler sees everything, Inspector. Stokes may know more than he's let on. Perhaps a name or a meeting that slipped Lady Beatrice's notice. Do keep an eye on him, Craddock smiled, finishing his tea. I will, and I'll let you know how it shakes out. You've been a godsend, Miss Marple. If I could bottle your instincts, I'd be Chief Constable by Christmas. She laughed softly, rising to leave. Flattery, Inspector, is no substitute for diligence. But do come to the rededication service tomorrow. The village needs to see this chapter closed. She left the station, her basket lighter, but her mind heavy with the weight of Lady Beatrice's fall. A woman of such promise, undone by her own ambition, it was a tragedy as old as the stones of St. Michael's, back in St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple spent the evening preparing for the service, ironing her best black dress and polishing her mother's cameo brooch. The village was alight with anticipation, the church's restoration a symbol of renewal after weeks of darkness. She telephoned Raymond, catching him at his club, where the news of Lady Beatrice's arrest was the talk of every table. Aunt Jane, he said, his voice tinged with awe, you've outdone yourself. Lady Beatrice as the brokeress, the scandal of the season. My chums are gobsmacked, but I told them you'd sniffed her out from the start. Is it really over? Miss Marple, winding her knitting wool, smiled into the receiver. Nearly, Raymond. The police have her, and the syndicate is unraveling. But I've asked Inspector Craddock to watch her butler, Stokes. A man in his position hears things, and Lady Beatrice was too clever to leave no escape route. If you hear any whispers about him, do let me know. Raymond promised to keep his ears open, his enthusiasm undimmed. You're a marvel, Aunt Jane. I'll check with my contacts. Someone's bound to know Stokes' story. Stay safe, and give St. Mary Mead my love. Miss Marple hung up, her thoughts settling like the dusk outside her window. The confrontation had exposed Lady Beatrice's empire, but the butler nagged at her, a loose thread in an otherwise tidy resolution. She recalled a case from her youth, where a servant had been the key to a blackmail ring, his loyalty a mask. For his own schemes, Stokes, she suspected, might hold one last piece of the puzzle. The next morning, Miss Marple walked to St. Michael's, her umbrella tucked under her arm despite the clear sky. The churchyard was pristine, the fate's traces swept away, and the air carried the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers. Inside, the nave was filled with villagers, their faces a mix of solemnity and relief. Mrs. Clement, in a new hat, greeted her warmly, guiding her to a pew near the front. "Jane, it's a new beginning," she whispered. "Thanks to you, the church feels like ours again." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes scanning the congregation. Dr. Haydock, Miss Weatherby, Mr. Hargreaves all were present, their presence a testament to the villagers' resilience. The service began with a hymn, "O God, our help in ages past," its notes soaring through the rafters. The vicar, Mr. Clement, spoke of forgiveness and renewal, his voice steady despite the strain of recent weeks. "This sanctuary," he said, "has seen darkness, but light prevails. Let us dedicate it anew to peace and truth." Miss Marple listened, her thoughts drifting to Lady Beatrice, now in a London cell, her empire reduced to a ledger of crimes. The service ended with a prayer, and the villagers spilled into the churchyard, their chatter bright with hope. Mrs. Clement pressed Miss Marple to stay for tea, but she declined, citing a need to rest. In truth, her mind was on Stokes, the butler, and the possibility of one last revelation. That afternoon, she received a letter from Craddock, delivered by the postman's bicycle. It was brief but electrifying, Stokes confessed. Was Lady Beatrice. Courier, before Grange, knew the syndicate's inner workings, named to more lieutenants, now in custody. Case closed, thanks to you. Miss Marple read it twice, her heart lightening. Stokes, the discreet butler, had been the final key, his confession, sealing the syndicate's fate. She pictured him, silent and watchful, carrying Lady Beatrice's orders until the pressure of arrest broke him. She spent the evening by her fire, her cat Tuppence purring at her feet. The confrontation in Mayfair had ended the broker's reign, but it was St. Mary Mead's quiet vigilance, its whispers, its eyes that had set the stage. Miss Marple picked up her knitting, the needles clicking in a steady rhythm. "A village," she murmured to Tuppence, "is a small place, but its truth is vast." The fire crackled, and she knitted on, content in the knowledge that St. Michael's and St. Mary Mead were at peace once more. Chapter 11. The church restored. The late October sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, softening the edges of the villagers' cottages and casting dappled shadows across the churchyard of St. Michael's. The turmoil of Victor Grant, murder, the glittering jewels, and the unmasking of Lady Beatrice Harrow, as the syndicate's broker, had begun to fade into the villagers' collective memory, like a storm that leaves the air clearer in its wake. The rededication service, held the previous day, had drawn a full congregation, their voices raised in hymns that seemed to cleanse the ancient stones of their recent darkness. Miss Jane Marple, walking slowly through her garden with a pair of secateurs, felt a quiet contentment, though her mind, ever restless, sifted through the case's final echoes. The church was restored, the syndicate dismantled, yet human nature, she knew, would always weave new mysteries. Her morning was spent tidying her borders, the lavender and asters bowing under the weight of autumn's chill. Lily, her maid, brought out a tray of tea, her chatter filled with the villagers' latest talk. "They're all saying St. Michael's feels right again, Miss Marple," she said, setting the tray on a garden table. "Mrs. Clements over the moon about the service, and Mr. Hargreaves swears the churchyards never looked better. But some folk are still whispering about that Lady Beatrice fancy, her being a criminal mastermind." Miss Marple poured her tea, her eyes twinkling. "People do surprise us, Lily, though perhaps not as much as we think. Lady Beatrice was clever, but her heart was ruled by greed, and greed always betrays itself. The church, though it's stronger than any scandal." She sipped her tea, her thoughts drifting to the service, where the vicar's words had struck a chord. A sanctuary, he had said, endures beyond the frailties of those who pass through. The rededication had been a triumph of community spirit. The nave, polished to a gleam by Mrs. Price and her team, had glowed with candlelight, and the organ's notes had filled the air with a solemn joy. Miss Marple, seated in her usual pew, had watched the villagers Dr. Haydock, Miss Weatherby, the Clements unite in a shared resolve to reclaim their sacred space. The vicar's sermon, centered on forgiveness and renewal, had been simple but profound, and even old Mr. Hargreaves, gruff as ever, had wiped a tear from his eye. Miss Marple had felt a pang of pride, not for her own role in solving the crime, but for St. Mary Mead's resilience, its ability to weather darkness and emerge whole. Her reverie was interrupted by a visit from Mrs. Clement, who arrived at the cottage with a basket of apples from the vicarage orchard. "Jane," she said, settling into a garden chair, "I can't thank you enough for what you've done. The service was perfect, and the village feels like itself again. But I keep thinking of that poor man, Grange, and those dreadful people, Lady Beatrice, Kendrick. How did you see through them?" Miss Marple offered her an apple, her expression serene. "I didn't see through them, Maud, not at first. I simply watched, as I always do. People are like books. You know their covers may be grand, but the pages tell the truth. Lady Beatrice's debts, Kendrick's arrogance, Grange's desperation, they wrote their own story, and St. Mary Mead read it." Mrs. Clement sighed. "Peeling an apple with a small knife. You make it sound so simple, but it's a gift, Jane. The police would have floundered without you. Inspector Craddock was at the service. You know he said you're worth a dozen detectives." Miss Marple laughed softly, shaking her head. "Inspector Craddock is kind, but he did the real work chasing Kendrick to Paris, confronting Lady Beatrice in her drawing room. I merely pointed out what was under his nose. The church, Maud, was the key. It's a place of truth, even when lies try to hide there." Mrs. Clement nodded, her eyes distant. "Leonard says the same. He's planning to repair the vestry lock at last, and we're raising funds for a new candlestick one that won't remind us of, well, you know." She paused, her voice lowering. "Do you think it's really over, Jane? No more of that syndicate lurking about?" Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the church tower, visible above the rooftops. "The syndicate is broken. Maud, Lady Beatrice's arrest, Kendrick's confession, even the butler Stokes' betrayal, they've torn it apart. But human nature doesn't rest. There will always be another Grange, another broker, though I hope not in St. Mary Mead for a while." Mrs. Clement shivered, wrapping her shawl tighter. "I hope so too. You'll come to the parish supper tonight, won't you? We're celebrating the restoration fund. It's nearly enough to fix the roof." Miss Marple promised to attend, and Mrs. Clement left, her basket lighter but her spirits high. Alone again, Miss Marple returned to her pruning, her thoughts circling the case's aftermath. The confrontation in London had been the climax, Lady Beatrice's empire crumbling under the weight of evidence, Kendrick's testimony, the coded letters, Stokes' final confession. Yet Miss Marple's mind lingered on the church, its role as both stage and witness to the crime. The vestry lock, the crypt's hidden note, the candlestickle had played their part. Silent sentinels in a drama of greed and betrayal. By afternoon, she prepared for her meeting with Craddock, packing a tin of Lily's shortbread and donning her best tweed coat. The walk to Much Benham was brisk, the air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves. The police station, with its familiar creak and clutter, welcomed her like an old friend. Craddock, sorting papers at his desk, rose with a smile, gesturing to a chair. "Miss Marple, you're a sight for sore eyes. This paperwork's enough to drive a man mad." "Tea," she accepted, setting the shortbread on the desk. "You've earned a rest, Inspector, after London. The service was a fine ending, wasn't it? The village feels whole again." Craddock poured tea, his face softening. "It was, I'm not much for churches, but that one's special. The vicar's sermon hit home, forgiveness, renewal, all that. Made me think of you, Miss Marple. You've got a way of cutting through the mess to find what matters." Miss Marple waved off the compliment, her eyes warm. "Nonsense, Inspector. I only see what's there. But I'm curious, have there been any loose ends since Lady Beatrice's arrest? Her butler, Stokes, for instance. His confession was a surprise, wasn't it?" Craddock nodded, taking a bite of shortbread. Stokes was the final nail. He'd been with Lady Beatrice for years, loyal to a fault. But when we showed him the letters and Kendrick's statement, he cracked. Admitted he was her first courier before Grange, running messages and cash to the syndicate's contacts. He knew the whole operation names, drops, even the code. Said Lady Beatrice promised him a cut of the insurance money, but when Grange started causing trouble, she cut Stokes out, made him a glorified errand boy. That's why he talked resentment, pure and simple. Miss Marple's needles, retrieved from her bag, clicked softly. "Resentment is a powerful motive, Inspector. Stokes saw her empire from the inside, yet she discarded him, just as she did. Grange, did he name anyone else in the syndicate?" "A few," Craddock said, flipping through his notebook. "A fence in Whitechapel, a driver in Bristol Small Fry, mostly now in custody. The big fish were Lady Beatrice and Kendrick, and with them gone, the syndicate's dead. Scotland Yard's mopping up the rest, thanks to those letters. We found a second safe at her country estate, stuffed with cash and more coded notes. She was planning to start over abroad if things went south." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "A contingency, as I thought. She was a strategist to the end. But what of the jewels themselves? Were they recovered fully, or did some slip through her fingers?" Craddock leaned back, his expression satisfied. "All accounted for, thank God. The pouch in the church had the bulk of them, emeralds, sapphires, that ruby. A few smaller pieces turned up in Kendrick's flat, hidden in a false drawer. Lady Beatrice had planned to sell them in Antwerp, but Grange's death threw her off. The insurance companies thrilled, though they're still sorting the payout mess." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to the jewels, their brilliance a stark contrast to the darkness they had sparked. "A tidy resolution, Inspector. And the church, have you found anything else there? The crypt, the chancel, I keep thinking of Mrs. Price's smudge, that trace of city dirt." Craddock chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't miss a trick, do you? We gave the church one last sweep, just to be sure. The chancel's clean, no more smudges. The crypt's empty, save for those old hymnals. The only thing we found was a broken pen nib near the vestry door, probably dropped by a the candlestick's back in use, by the way polished and innocent as ever." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Innocent, perhaps, but it played its part. I'm glad the church is free of secrets now. The service did it justice, I think." Finished his tea, his voice warm. "It did. I saw you in the pews, looking like you were solving another mystery. The village owes you, Miss Marple, though I doubt they'll ever know how much." She waved off the praise, rising to leave. The village owes itself, Inspector. Its eyes and ears solved this case, not just mine. Do come to the parish supper tonight. It's a celebration, and you've earned a place at the table. Promise to attend, and Miss Marple left the station, her basket swinging lightly at her side. The walk back to St. Mary Mead was peaceful, the lanes lined with blackberry bushes, heavy with fruit. A reminder of the village's quiet abundance. By evening, the parish hall was aglow with lanterns, its long tables laden with pies, and Mrs. Clement's famous trifle. The villagers, dressed in their Sunday best, filled the room with laughter and chatter, the air thick with the scent of roast beef and mulled cider. Miss Marple, in her black dress and cameo brooch, took a seat near the vicar, her knitting bag at her feet. Dr. Haydock, across the table, raised a glass in her direction. To Miss Marple, he said, his voice carrying the sharpest mind in St. Mary Mead, whether she admits it or not. The room erupted in applause, and Miss Marple blushed, her smile modest. Really, Doctor, you exaggerate. I'm just an old woman who likes to listen. To the church, and to all of you, may we keep our sanctuary strong. The toast was met with cheers, and the supper unfolded in a haze of warmth and goodwill. Miss Weatherby shared a story of her youth. Mr. Hargreaves grumbled about the cost of new locks, and Mrs. Clement beamed as the Restoration Fund was declared a success. Miss Marple listened, her eyes moving from face to face, each a chapter in the village's story. The case, she felt, had strengthened St. Mary Mead, its shared ordeal a bond that would endure. As the evening wound down, she slipped outside, the night air cool against her skin. The church loomed across the road, its windows dark but its presence comforting. She stood by the lich gate, where Grange and Kendrick had argued, and let her thoughts wander. The syndicate had been a storm, but the church had weathered it, its stones a testament to resilience. Lady Beatrice, Kendrick, Stokesall had fallen, their ambitions no match for the villagers' quiet strength. She recalled a saying from her childhood, "Evil passes through, but goodness endures." It was true, she thought. Here more than anywhere, Mrs. Clement joined her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "Jane, you're miles away, thinking of the case." Miss Marple turned, her eyes warm. "In a way, Maud, I was thinking of the church and how it holds us together. Evil passes through, as it did with Grange and Lady Beatrice, but goodness endures. You and Leonard have made that clear." Mrs. Clement squeezed her arm, her voice soft. "You've made it clear, Jane. The village looks to you, you know, even if you don't see it. Will you walk back with me?" Miss Marple nodded, and they strolled through the village, the stars bright above. The parish hall's lights faded behind them, but the church remained, a beacon in the dark. Miss Marple's heart was light, her role in the case a quiet footnote in St. Mary Mead's long story. She knew, as she always did, that other mysteries would come, but for now the sanctuary was restored, and that was enough. Chapter 12. A quiet evening, the twilight of late October draped St. Mary Mead in a gentle hush. The village's lanes softened by the glow of lamplight spilling from cottage windows. The air carried the sharp temps of wood smoke and the faint rustle of leaves skittering across the cobblestones, a reminder that winter was not far off. The rededication of St. Michael's Church, followed by the parish supper, had left the village buoyant, its spirit lifted by the resolution of Victor murder and the unmasking of Lady Beatrice Harrow as the syndicate's broker. The scandal, though still whispered about in the shop and the pub, was settling into the realm of legend, a tale to be recounted over tea for years to come. Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour fire with her knitting in her lap, felt the weight of the case lift like mist from a meadow, though her mind, ever curious, lingered on its nuances, seeking the final clarity that comes with reflection. Her cottage, with its low beams and chintz curtains, was a haven of order, the firelight dancing on the polished surfaces of her mother's mahogany table. Tuppence, her tabby cat, curled contentedly at her feet, purring in rhythm with the soft click of Miss Marple's needles. The evening was hers to savour, a rare moment of stillness after weeks of unravelling the tangled threads of greed and betrayal. Yet even in this quiet, her thoughts returned to the church, its ancient stones a silent witness to human frailty and resilience. Lady Beatrice, Arthur Kendrick, the butler Stokesall had played their parts in a drama that had tested St. Mary Mead, but the village, as always, had endured. A knock at the door broke her reverie. Lily, bustling from the kitchen, admitted Dolly Bantry, whose arrival was heralded by a gust of cool air and the rustle of her voluminous scarf. "Jane, you old sleuth," Dolly exclaimed, settling into an armchair with a glass of sherry from Miss Marple's modest decanter. "I've just come from the Blue Boar, and the village is positively agog. They're calling you the Sherlock of St. Mary Mead. Tell me everything. How did you know Lady Beatrice was the mastermind?" Miss Marple smiled, her needles pausing as she poured herself a small sherry. "Dear Dolly, I'm no Sherlock, just an old woman with a habit of noticing things. Lady Beatrice's downfall was written in her own actions, her debts, her charm, her need for control. The jewels, the coded note, Kendrick's fear, it all pointed to a mind that thought itself untouchable. But no one, you know, is beyond the reach of truth." Dolly leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "But the way you pieced it together, the crypt, the candlestick, that dreadful butler." "I heard from Mrs. Weatherby that Stokes confessed everything, said Lady Beatrice treated him like a dog. Is it true she planned to flee to Antwerp?" Miss Marple nodded, her expression thoughtful. "So Inspector Craddock says. Stokes was her first courier, loyal until she sidelined him for Grange. His resentment was her undoing, he knew too much. And when the police pressed him, he spilled her secrets like a broken teapot. The Antwerp plan was her escape, a new life funded by stolen jewels. But Grange's greed and Kendrick's arrest unravelled it all." Dolly sipped her sherry, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And the church, how did you know it was the key? That crypt, with its hidden notice, like something out of one of Arthur's detective novels." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, a soft counterpoint to her words. "The church was always the key, Dolly. It's a place of sanctuary, but also of secret sits. Corners and shadows are perfect for those who wish to hide. Grange chose it, or was sent there, because it was quiet, overlooked, yet accessible. The crypt's note was a stroke of luck, but luck, you know, favours the watchful. I merely suggested where to look." Dolly laughed, shaking her head. "You're to modest Jane. The whole village knows you outsmarted a criminal empire. Mrs. Clement's planning a plaque for the church, you note to mark the restoration. I told her it should have your name on it, but she said you'd never allow it." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her tone was firm. "Quite right, too. Plaques are for heroes, and I'm no hero, just a neighbour who listens. The church belongs to the village, not to me. Let it stand as it always has, a testament to our strength." Dolly stayed for an hour, pressing for every detail of the case, from the Fates trap to the confrontation in Mayfair. Miss Marple shared what she could, her account sparing but vivid, careful to credit Craddock and the villagers' collective vigilance. It was St. Mary Mead's eyes that caught Kendrick, she said, and its whispers that pointed to Lady Beatrice. A village, Dolly, is like a tapestry, tread matters, no matter how small. As Dolly left, her scarf trailing like a banner, Miss Marple returned to her knitting, her thoughts drifting to the case's aftermath. The syndicate's collapse had been swift, its lieutenants scattered or arrested, their secrets laid bare by Stokes' confession and the coded letters. Yet she wondered about the smaller players, men like Tommy Bell, the petty thief who had first named the broker. Had they all been caught, or were some still lurking, waiting for another chance? She recalled a case from her youth, where a minor crook had escaped justice, only to resurface years later, his resentment festering into a new crime. Human nature, she thought, was a cycle, its patterns as predictable as the seasons. The next morning, she received a letter from Inspector Craddock, written in his neat, precise hand. "Dear Miss Marple," it began, "the case is officially closed, and I'm back in London tying up loose ends. Lady Beatrice is awaiting trial, and Kendrick's plea deal has netted us 3 more syndicate members. Stokes is cooperating fully, likely to get a reduced sentence. The jewels are back with the insurance company, and St. Mary Mead's Church is the talk of Scotland Yard. Thanks to you, I'll visit soon to thank you properly. Yours, Dermot Craddock." Miss Marple read the letter twice, her heart lightening at the finality of it. The case had been a storm, but the village had weathered it, its quiet strength a match for any criminal mind. She tucked the letter into her writing desk, alongside others from past cases, a private archive of St. Mary Mead's secrets. Her thoughts turned to the church, its restoration a symbol of renewal, and she resolved to visit one last time before the week was out. That afternoon, she walked to St. Michael's, her umbrella tapping the path, though the sky was clear. The churchyard was serene, its gravestones softened by moss and the last of the autumn flowers. Inside, the nave was quiet, the air heavy, with the scent of wax and old wood. Mrs. Price, polishing the pews, greeted her with a nod. "Miss Marple, you've done wonders for us. The church feels alive again, thanks to you." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes scanning the familiar space, the chancel, the vestry, the spot where Grange had lain. "Not I, Mrs. Price. The village did it, with a little help from the police. Have you noticed anything new, now that the dust has settled?" Mrs. Price paused, her cloth still. "Nothing much, but I found a button in the vestry yesterday, tucked under a chair, brass, with a fancy crest. I gave it to the vicar, thought it might belong to one of the choir boys, but it's too fine for that." Miss Marple's interest quickened, though her expression remained mild. "A button, you say? How curious. May I see it?" Mrs. Price led her to the vicar's study, where Mr. Clement was sorting hymnals. He produced the button, a small, gleaming thing with an embossed cresta, lion, and a star. Unmistakably aristocratic. "It's not ours," Mr. Clement said, "but I didn't think it worth troubling the police. Probably dropped by a visitor." Miss Marple examined the button, her mind racing. The crest was unfamiliar, but its quality suggested wealth, perhaps a relic of Lady Beatrice's world, or one of her syndicate's contacts. "May I borrow it, Mr. Clement?" she asked. "I'll return it, but it might be worth a look." The vicar agreed, and Miss Marple tucked the button into her pocket, her thoughts circling its significance. A button was a small thing, but in her experience, small things led to large truths. She thanked Mrs. Price and Mr. Clement, then left the church, her steps purposeful. Back at her cottage, she telephoned Raymond West, catching him at his Kensington flat. "Raymond, dear," she said, "I have a small task for you." A button was found in the vestry, brass with a lion and star crest. "Could you ask your society friends if it matches any family or club insignia? It may be nothing, but I'd like to be sure." Raymond's voice was tinged with amusement. "A button, Aunt Jane. You're relentless. I'll check with my heraldic chum at the clubbies, a nut for crests. Anything else?" Miss Marple hesitated, then added, "Just one thing. Keep an ear out for any talk of Lady Beatrice's associates who might still be free. The syndicate's broken, but I wonder if we've missed someone, a silent partner, perhaps." Raymond promised to investigate, his curiosity piqued. "You're tying up every thread, aren't you? I'll let you know what I find. Give tuppence a pat for me." Miss Marple hung up, her mind settling on the button. It was a long shot, but her instincts, honed by years of unraveling village dramas, told her it was worth pursuing. The evening passed quietly, Miss Marple knitting by her fire, tuppences per a soothing backdrop. The parish supper, the read Craddock's letterall had marked the case's end, yet the button nagged at her, a final question in an otherwise answered mystery. She pictured Lady Beatrice's drawing room, its gilt and velvet a stark contrast to St. Michael's simplicity. Had someone else been in the vestry, someone overlooked, a syndicate member, perhaps, or a visitor drawn by the fate's chaos? She recalled a case from her youth, where a lost cufflink had led to a burglar's arrest, its monogram the key to his identity. The button, she felt, might hold a similar secret. The next morning, she received a telegram from Raymond. "Crest belongs to Harrow family, likely Lady Beatrice's late husband. Button probably hers, dropped during planning. No new syndicate leads, but we'll keep looking. R.W. Miss Marple read it, her heart sinking slightly. The button, then, was a relic of Lady Beatrice's visit to St. Mary Mead, perhaps when she scouted the church for her scheme. It closed the circle, tying her directly to the vestry, but offered no new villains. She tucked the telegram away, satisfied that the case was truly done by afternoon. She joined Mrs. Clement for a walk through the village, the lanes quiet under a grey sky. They passed the Blue Boar, where Mr. Jenkins waved from the door, and the shop, where Miss Weatherby was rearranging her window display. "It's peaceful, isn't it?" Mrs. Clement said, her voice warm. "Thanks to you, Jane. The church is ours again, and the village feels safe." Miss Marple smiled, her umbrella tapping the path. "Safe for now, Maud, but villagers, like people, are never free of secrets. We simply learn to live with them and to watch." They parted at the vicarage, and Miss Marple returned home, her thoughts settling like the dusk. The button had been a final flourish, a confirmation of Lady Beatrice's reach, but the case needed no more unravelling. St. Michael's was restored, the syndicate broken, and St. Mary Mead's eyes, as always, were open. That evening she sat by her fire, tuppence at her feet, her knitting a steady rhythm in the quiet. The case had been a mirror, reflecting the greed and cunning that lurked beneath polished surfaces. Lady Beatrice, Kendrick, Stokesall had been caught, their web torn apart by the villagers' quiet vigilance. Miss Marple's needles clicked, each stitch a testament to her belief in patterns, in the truths that emerge when one watches closely. "The world," she murmured to tuppence, "is full of patterns, and a village is the best place to see them." The fire glowed, and she knitted on, ready for the next mystery that St. Mary Mead, in its timeless way, would surely bring.